Welcome everyone to another episode of Cinematic Realms. I'm your host, John Webster, and with me, as always, is my trusted co-host, Jared. How you doing this week, Jared?
I'm doing good. I was on a ship to Valinor, and then I decided to I would just jump off and try to swim all the way back to Middle Earth. It didn't go very well, so now you guys
You
put me ashore.
you must be winded. Um, and this week, we've got some wonderful guests back after quite some time. So happy to have you, Cecilia. Welcome back, and Aaron
Thank
or
you.
Arendil is back after we you were just on a couple weeks ago for the Mask of Zorro, and this is quite a different, you know, quite a different conversation for quite a different thing, but it's going to be a lot of fun nonetheless. Um, yeah, so where to start? It's been a while since I had a round table.
I know
um,
the feeling. I know the feeling.
but yeah, we'll just start. Cecilia, since you're the one who hasn't been on in quite some time, I think I'm going to pass the buck to you to start off. Um, just I make no secret about the fact that I fell in love with this show. I think that's that's a shared sentiment, hopefully by the whole panel. But just tell me, what was your experience coming to the show, and your sort of general thoughts, what you thought of it.
Well, I did enjoy it. I can tell you that. I know I am aware of the flaws of the show, and I would have certainly have preferred that they had the rights to the Silmarillion, but they did a great job with what they had, and I enjoyed it. I really did enjoy it, and I have like a few favorite moments, and of course I will talk about that later as it comes. But yeah, in general, I did enjoy it.
Good. I'm and I love your background, Cecilia.
Of course, of
I
course.
Yeah, and of course I did have that as one of my screenshots as well. I
Yeah.
just it was I have to admit, speaking of wishing they had rights to the Silmarillion, those tantalizing bits that we got of Valinor, in the beginning were just so thrilling. I remember I was lucky enough to go see this in a theater uh, just before it premiered, and um, and I just remember my heart beating really fast when the first shot opens up, and I can tell right off that these are, elven children in Valinor, and there was something so spine tingling about that. After so many years of, loving not just the Lord of the Rings, but the Professor's whole legendarium, and remembering reading the Silmarillion all the way back. I think I read it back in 2001. And so I've been imagining the stuff for a while. Um, and so getting those glimpses of Valinor, and then also hearing things in the show, like when Elrond and Celebrimbor are talking about the hammer of Feanor, and, getting that stuff that we didn't get in other, adaptations, that was rooted in the Silmarillion. It was just like, oh my god. I just had, I felt like such a geek, but in the best possible way.
Aren't we
Aaron,
all?
yeah. Aaron, I'll go ahead, move to you. I know a lot of, there's a significant portion of our shared love, for this show is rooted in the music. Um, so I expect you and I will be mentioning that quite often in the stream. But just tell me a bit about, your thoughts.
I was gonna say, you'll never guess what I was listening to just before I logged on for the stream. So it's a real mystery. So yeah, but no, I also like, I am I've said before on other streams, I'm not nearly as attached to the books and the sort of actual Tolkien's works as a lot of other people are. I'm more of a fan of the movies. I love I love the world that Peter Jackson built based on all of Tolkien's stuff. Like, I'm not like, oh, I'm a Peter Jackson fan, not a Tolkien fan, but I haven't read the main series. I have read quite a bit of the Silmarillion, and I read Children of Hurin for some reason a really long time ago. But I was so excited for some more on-screen Middle Earth, and there were a lot. John, I know you and I especially talked a lot beforehand about, like, there was a lot of trepidation, like Amazon. This is Amazon. This is not people we're familiar with. These are they're putting all this money into it, which seems great. But then it was like the casting call for like nude people, and we were like, okay, what are we doing here? Like, I'm not super on board like right away, but then we sort of started hearing some of the music coming out, and we were like, no, maybe this could be great. Never mind, So, but when I did see it, I was just like Ceci said, it's not flawless. It's not that there's no problems with it, but it was so beautiful, and I cried the first episode, and all of this kind of stuff. It just, how wonderful I thought it was. It's like, it's everything about it is a joy to behold. There's nothing in this that is poorly thought out or ugly at all. But also, I really liked the story. I liked the story that they created, as I said, like, they don't have access to a lot of like the stories that we know, so they had to create a lot of this out of whole cloth. And I really like the story that they did create. It's a story about, like, a lot of it is about love and friendship, and it was watching it too at a time when it was like directly juxtaposed with House of the Dragon, which we all were doing as well, where it was like, you watch House of the Dragon and it's George and everything is grim and everybody is, and then it's like, oh, now we get to watch Rings of Power, and it's not like everything is wonderful, but everything is beautiful, and oh, look at the beautiful friendship between Elrond and Durin and stuff. And it was so much lighter, I think, in spite of not having sort of juvenile themes. It was so much lighter, and it was just such a, I don't know, it was such a joy for me to watch this. And I really, 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 really liked it. And again, like I said, John, the soundtrack blew me away. I was sort of disappointed about not getting Shore, but then we got Bear and Said, and I was like, okay, like, look, no one can beat the Master Shore in my mind, but Bear came just about as close as you could possibly come without eclipsing him. So yeah.
I keep cracking up because you were accepting of that, and when I talk about this, I'm talking like a difference of a half an hour to 45 minutes. Like, you were on board sooner than I was with the fact that Bear was doing the music, because initially that news came out, the first couple tracks were released, and I was like, well, it's a really good Bear McCreary score, but it's not Howard Shore. And and then it took me, like I said, about 30 to 45 minutes of listening to the music, and I was like, okay, it's a great Bear McCreary store. And you know what, it's not only that, it's probably one of the greatest, it's certainly one of the greatest television scores ever, and it stands beautifully up against everything that Howard did. And it didn't take me long before I was like, okay, this is extraordinary. And we still got, Howard's, fingerprints are on the show through the main title theme, which I suspect, because that was written after Bear had already been working on his score, I would not be surprised if we see elements of that main title theme incorporated into the score moving forward, now that Bear has access to it. So it'll be interesting to see what he does with that. But it's absolutely extraordinary. Of course, I'm going to do my physical media geek out and say that I do have my beautiful CD copy of of the score. And yes, I am grouchy about the fact that I can't get the episodic albums on CD yet. Hopefully one day those will be forthcoming. You never know. But no, back to what you were saying about the initial rumblings of the show, though, Aaron. I was one of those people who was like, "There's going to be nudity in this. What's going on? They're trying to make it like Game of Thrones," and then,
Luckily,
but
they
then,
didn't.
yeah. And in no way, shape, or form, like this is whatever you think of it, this is very much a Lord of the Rings series, and it's steeped in, it's the kind of storytelling that, we have become familiar with, being associated with Tolkien. It very much feels like that. So, so thankfully for me, all those concerns were unfounded, and it shows me that I shouldn't succumb to that sort of social media panic that pervades pretty much every fandom these days. But
well, it's important to us, though. You know what I mean? And like, not in the same way that that it is apparently to some people, who abhor any kind of change or diversion from it. But like, I it's important, and so it was important that it didn't suck to me, So.
Yeah. I mean, and if those things had proved true, that if it had been more, George R.R. Martin than J.R.R. Tolkien, then I would have been disappointed. But I'm just so happy that it turned out the way that it did. And, and people say, oh, John, you're just so in love with everything. But I do want to say that I have like small quibbles with the series, and I do rub up against a little bit of some of the adaptation choices they made, which I also understand why they made them. But as a longstanding Tolkien fan, there are some things where I'm like, could they have gone in a slightly different direction there? But I'm not the one charged with making a television series out of the thinnest of material. So I completely understand the choices they made, and the positives far outweigh any quibbles that I have. As you said, Aaron, this is just a breathtakingly gorgeous show, not just in the visuals, but in terms of the characters and the heart. So yeah, I absolutely love it. Anyway, Jared, go ahead and I don't know that we've actually talked that much between us about the show, other than the fact that we both loved it. So I'm very intrigued to get your feelings on the series.
Well, I also love it, but I would say that it was kind of an interesting journey to screen, because we heard about this show for a long, long time. Yes, we're going to talk about Lady Bronwyn. I have feelings, very, very, very lovely feelings. I would say that we first heard about this show all the way back in 2017, the possibility of this show, when they started to shop the rights around. And at that time, Game of Thrones was still going on, and people were looking for the next Game of Thrones. And this was before we even knew House of the Dragon. This was back in I don't even know if Blood Moon had been confirmed at that time. So it was a long ways off, and I was just kind of like, that seems like it would be nice, but I am not going to get any kind of expectations up for it. Then it got sold to Amazon, who has more money than God, and I was like, okay, they might be able to handle the budgetary aspects of this, but what's the show actually going to be? And when I heard, they had bought the rights to the appendices, but they weren't going to be able to use a lot of the lore from, say, the Silmarillion, that kind of left things a little bit more questionable for me in terms of, hey, what actually are they going to do? There's obviously a number of possibilities, but it's, you know, they need to kind of base it on something. And the rumor I kept hearing was that, oh, maybe they'll do a young Aragorn show. And I thought that sounded, you know, not fun enough, but like smaller scale. And I was like, I would enjoy that, but it's not going to be like the grand epic that Game of Thrones was or the Lord of the Rings films were. But then I started to hear that it was going to be based around the Second Age, which is the age of Middle-earth that we probably know the least about, and everything that we know about it comes from Tolkien's appendices. And I was like, okay, well, this is starting to, you know, take shape a little bit, but again, long ways off. And then we started to get the concept, and I didn't follow the production very closely in terms of the casting, indeed, because a lot of the casting was unknown actors. So I was just like, I'll wait for the trailer. Then we got the trailer, the first trailer, and I was pretty impressed. But again, I was just kind of like, okay, I'll wait and see. And then the show premiere date was announced, and it was going to premiere essentially in a little bit of a fantasy nirvana for me. There was going to be the new, there was going to be House of the Dragon and the Star Wars show Andor and Rings of Power all airing at the same time. And I was like, I don't know if I can handle this, but I look forward to the challenge. But that kind of meant that the unadulterated hype that I would have for something like The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power, was a little bit more muted because my attentions were split. And then the show was going to premiere, and I didn't get to watch it right away. And I had a long day at work, and I came home and I was settling in, and I'm like, okay, I'm ready to put this on. I had avoided all the reviews, and then I started it. And from the first sound that we hear of Galadriel's voiceover, that nothing was evil in the beginning, and there was a time that the world was so young, there had not even been a sunrise, but even then, there was light. And I was like, I'm loving this. This is kind of the vibe that I want. And then you talked about the, you know, seeing the elves in Valinor, or the young children. And I was like, is this in Valinor? Could this be in Valinor? But I wasn't sure. And then we got the scene, the opening monologue where Galadriel meets her brother, Finrod. And he gives her that speech about the ship and the water, you know, knowing what, like, how to tell darkness from the light. And I was just like, this is great. This is great. I'm really digging this. And we can talk more about that speech, because it is one of the things that absolutely, like, opened my heart to the show. But then the moment that crystallized it for me was when they crest over the ridge, and we get the shot that's Cecilia's background that you also put up earlier, John, of the two trees of Valinor. And when that happened, it was just like, you know, the lights in the skies of Ea opened, and I was just like, I cannot believe I am actually watching this show. I cannot believe it exists. We're in Valinor right now. And that just made me so happy that as the prologue continued and we started seeing images from the first age of the War of the Wrath, and I was like, oh my God, this has the potential to be something special. And by the time the first episode ended and they had looped back around to that first conversation with Galadriel and Finrod, and the idea that sometimes to know the difference, you have to touch the darkness, and Galadriel jumps over the ship, and I'm just like, I'm in. I'm so in. And that vibe just continued throughout the entire show, because I do agree that there were ups and downs. There were adaptation choices that I didn't think were perfect. There were just practical realities that with making a show like this, you have to reckon with. It is not going to get to be pure imagination. But they hit all the marks pretty much for me that they really needed to hit. They didn't stumble in the ways that I feared that they might stumble. And by the time it was over, I was just feeling, for the most part, like that was one of the best first seasons in terms of proof of concept first seasons that I've ever seen. And by that, I mean that there are shows where there's a lower degree of difficulty where, you know, if you're doing a workplace comedy or a procedural drama or any of these shows that we're familiar with, you know the beats, and they might execute them at a super high level, but it's, you know, the roadmap is there. And this really did feel a lot like the first season of Game of Thrones in many ways, without which this show would not be possible. In the sense was, this was a show that if you pitched it to someone even a few years ago, they would say that it was impossible, and they would be right. But this creative team, they did it. They proved that this show can work. And while they, you know, they still have to land the plane in terms of the remaining, you know, 4 or 5 seasons that we're going to get, what they accomplished in this first season is truly astonishing to me, because they did it. They got the vibe, they got the voice, they got the emotional investment that they needed, and I was just so impressed.
Yeah, I do want to mention again that I was actually thinking about this last night, and thankfully I had the foresight to go looking for some of the pictures that I snapped on the night of the screening that I went to. This is right here was the actual screen as I was waiting for it to start, and they had the music playing and everything. And then I had a couple shots of some posters out in the lobby and stuff. And I am really happy I took these because not to get somber for a second, but I do think that this was the last thing that I went to go see in the theater before my mom passed away. Uh, and I mention that because I think when she did pass away, the episodes that had yet to air, I think it was either episode 6 or episode 7 when I was sort of dealing with all that emotion. And I just remember thinking, especially with episode 7, as I was sitting there watching this, that how grateful I was to be getting, you know, something steeped in Tolkien. And which is why, like, I love the first season of House of the Dragon, and I'm due to do a rewatch before we get season 2. But it was not the right show at the right time for me, because it's just so, you know, Westeros is so nihilistic in a lot of ways, and it's not the show for getting you through, you know, grief. This was. And it was very healing. And especially when we get in episode 7, there's a time that we spend with Galadriel and Theo, and she's talking to him about a lot about sort of a larger hand at work, and seeing, you know, and sort of trusting in the forces of good and not just looking to the, you know, the forces of darkness. And it's a lot of stuff that I felt like I not only needed to hear but wanted to hear. I wanted something that was going to pull me out of, well, not pull me out of, because there was no way I was going to be pulled out of
No, but
the
gave you a
darkness.
safe space. It gave you a safe space, and I know
Yeah.
exactly how you feel. I mean, not in the same type of way, but I have mentioned previously that the Middle Earth was kind of like a safe place for me when I was in high school, when I was going through something very difficult, and or something very difficult in my life and my personal life, and the Middle Earth provided me a place to go, a place to escape reality.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I definitely understand how you felt with this show at those so difficult times. And it's heartwarming. I mean, even in the episode where we see the volcano explode and all of that, even then, because that
Yeah.
meant that the the
Yeah.
world
It's
that we
it's
know and love is there now. You know.
it's amazing to me because because like there's so much like hellfire and brimstone going on in those episodes, and it's just, and it speaks to Tolkien, and and the story that he crafted, and what they've done with the show, that it still felt that there was healing, even amongst that I couldn't get from something like House of the Dragon.
There's hope. You know, like there's hope in so much of it. That's Westeros is not a real hopeful place at the end of the day for many reasons, but
Nope.
Tolkien's Middle Earth is almost always is.
Mhm.
There's always hope there.
And the other thing I want to mention tied to this, I've mentioned this a couple times, and I don't want to dwell on this because I want this to be a happy stream, and we're going to talk about happy feelings. But when we found out about my mom, we were also in the midst of a hurricane that was hitting our house. Well, not just our house, but lots of houses.
Just your city house.
And
that time was
yeah. And so I had downloaded a bunch of the Brings of Power episodes up to what had been released, because I was like, when the power goes out, I'm gonna put on my my tablet, and I'm gonna watch Rings of Power. And sure enough, power went out, and that's what I was doing. I had started to watch the first episode, and speaking of Galadriel's, the monologue, and or the voiceover rather, starting off. And while I was starting to watch the episode, unbeknownst to me, my dad had gotten a call on his cell phone, or maybe it was a text. I'm not sure. I'm sure. Normally it would be a phone call, but I'm not sure which it was given what was going on. And letting him know that my mom had passed away. I was sitting there completely ignorant of this, with my headphones on, zeroed in on my screen, and just as Galadriel says, "We had no word for death, because we thought our joys would be unending." And then I forget what it is she says after that, and until the very light of our home was extinguished, something to that effect. And right as that hit, my dad came over, removed my headphones with tears in his eyes, and said, "She's gone." And it's always hit me that I was listening to what I was listening to at that precise moment. And I'll never forget that as long as I live. And so immediately there's a connection to the show that transcends even what it would have been besides, which I was already in love with the show, but I feel a deep connection to so many of its themes, and the characters, and the storytelling, as it relates to my mom's passing. And like I said, I apologize, I don't want to dwell on this for too long, but I just feel like I can't not talk about it, because it was such a sort of important, it was in many ways the most important moment of my life. And to have that attachment to it's just, some might say, oh, it's just a television show. But that feels important to me, that's not a thing by chance, that I was listening, that it was those words, and because that's how I felt, and so yeah. So that means a lot to me, and the show means a lot to me, and we'll get into all the other reasons why that is, the beautiful characters, and the story, and talking more about the music. But I needed to just speak about that real quick. So yeah, we'll move on now, so that we're happier and not and not
Thank
sad.
you for sharing that, John.
Yeah.
Don't worry,
We
John.
love you.
We love you.
Love you guys too. And thank you, Cassie. The big hugs right back. So there's a lot to cover in the series. If we did sort of break it down by episode, I think we will be here for about at least 10 hours. So we're not going to quite do that. But I think Aaron, I think it was you who mentioned about Durin and Elrond, right?
Yeah.
And I just want to say it's not the only part of the show and the only characters that really spoke to me emotionally, but it does feel like the perfect way to start because I love their relationship and the emotion there, and part of this discussion too that I want to have about the two of them is about Elrond as well, because there's something incredibly fun about not just fun but very emotional about I want to make sure I get his name, Robert, what's his last name?
Robert Aramayo.
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 Yeah, aka young Ned Stark.
Yeah.
One of the few actors I knew before the show.
Robert
I
Aramayo.
loved his portrayal as Elrond because, and I say this as someone who adores Hugo Weaving as Elrond in the movies, but the Elrond of the books is, a bit softer. And
this kind of felt like that, right?
Yeah, Elrond, like Hugo Weaving is always going to be associated with Agent Smith. It's not his fault, but I do remember that there were people coming out of the first movie who would have sworn that he said, "Welcome to Rivendell, Mr. Baggins." And
oh man!
and so as much as I love him, I'm very happy that we also now have a portrayal of Elrond that is softer and more, maybe a bit more welcoming. And I think it's great just to have two different versions of the character. But I remember like reading the books for the first time, and especially The Hobbit, where you're welcome to the house of Elrond, the last homely house, and and there's just and so I love the idea of picturing this version of Elrond, welcoming Bilbo
and
and
it
the
kind of
dwarves.
makes sense. And it kind of makes sense that you have a warmer kind of version of Elrond in this series, because in the events of Lord of the Rings, they know that everything is going to go to hell basically if they don't manage to destroy the ring. So he's kind of he kind of has the stress and the guilt, I feel, that he's living for Valinor and leaving humanity to to their doom or so if they don't manage to do that. So and quite realistically speaking, I mean, the odds were very much against them. So it's logical to have another run that is a little harsh in that version, versus here when you have an Elrond that is younger. It's, I don't know, he's kind of, I don't want to say looking for his place in the world, because he has already like a thousand, like I don't know how many thousand years old, but I don't know, maybe he's trying to figure out I don't know, his role maybe in the universe. and yeah, I love that. I love that version of him. The only thing that I didn't like, to be honest, is the characterization of the hair, the haircuts. Yeah, that's one of the things that I really didn't enjoy about any elf, except maybe for Galadriel, but that's another story. But yeah, I didn't like the portrayal of the elves in this series, to be honest. They felt kind of, I don't know, it felt kind of weird that they had short hair. And the thing that they removed like I don't know the name of this in English. I did the side
Sideburn.
sideburn. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. It felt weird, but other than that, he was perhaps one of my favorite characters on this show. I mean, I had a lot of favorite characters, but Elrond has a very special place. Um, so I can't leave him out of my top 3, maybe.
I think like him being a little softer here makes sense as well, because like this isn't the Elrond who like watched Isildur not destroy the ring, like
Yeah,
Elrond, by the time
exactly.
we see Elrond in Lord of the Rings, like he has seen some shit, man. And
Shit.
like this one has too, obviously, but like, it sort of makes sense that maybe he's a little bit harsher on the world now that he's seen sort of what people can do. And again, not that he doesn't know that here, but especially being, only half elven, like he's obviously probably more prone to change than other elves. And even if you're not prone to change, like thousands of years, you sort of evolve. Galadriel clearly does as well from what we see here too. And I know that that's a sort of point of contention with some people, is that this Galadriel does not sort of feel like one of the oldest elves. That she's a little less politically savvy. She's maybe a little more naive. She's, stuff like that. But I don't think that's nearly as interesting as what we actually are given here. And so, but even Galadriel, it's like you live that many thousands of years, like you're gonna grow and change, like life is gonna change you. So I think it sort of makes sense that Elrond is maybe a little bit softer here versus the guy who was like, why didn't I just push Isildur into the friggin' mountain, so
not to mention that, for example, Galadriel was there when they had to go from Valinor to the Middle Earth,
right,
forcefully. And Elrond wasn't.
Right.
And Elrond is significantly younger than Galadriel. And even though he may have seen shit already in his many years, he hadn't seen like the strongest events that he had to endure during his life. So yeah.
Well, Elrond's always been an outlier with his hair. I will say the poor man has receding hairline by the time of Lord of the Rings. That's not very elven.
The elven widow's peak. So yeah.
Yeah, I know, but I don't know. It's just the long hair. Maybe I kind of miss the long hair.
Yeah, I would say regarding his characterization, I think you're right, Cecilia. I think he is searching for his place in the world in this show. And that's part of the reason that he seems different than we know of him in the Lord of the Rings trilogy itself, when he's established as one of the great elven lords, the Lord of Rivendell, and the bearer of one of the Rings of Power. And part of that is that I really appreciated that this story took the opportunity to explore Elrond's unique background, specifically the idea that he is in fact Elrond half-elven, because that's kind of which is kind of one of the things that if you just watch Lord of the Rings, you could be forgiven for not knowing that, because it's really not as pertinent to the story. And in fact, it seems kind of weird that he's so dead set on his daughter not marrying a mortal when he was half mortal himself before he was given the choice by the Valar. But what's interesting about the fact that he is half elven is it really does kind of explain his unique position as kind of a young, ambitious politician who's clearly in Gil-galad's inner circle, but is also kind of being held apart and not invited to certain meetings. And that really is crystallized when he has that scene where he talks to Durin about his father, Arondir the Mariner, and the idea that this guy, who was himself half-elven but a mortal man at the time, who accomplished one of the greatest feats the world has ever seen by successfully sailing to Valinor to beseech the Valar to provide aid in their war against Morgoth. And he was successful in doing that and got the gods of the world to side with them and then they raised him up into the literal stars to carry the Silmaril across the night sky for eternity. And you're like, of course this guy has a lot to live up to. And he's also on his mother's side, he's descended from freaking Beren and Luthien.
Mhm.
And his brother, who chose to be mortal, became the first king of Numenor. And he's like, I'm kind of an attaché to the Elven King right now.
He was kind of like the Leonard Hofstadter of the Hofstadter family in The Big Bang Theory.
And then then we open the series and is being told, yeah, sorry, dude who has all this awesome stuff to live up to, you're not an elf lord, so you're not invited to the meeting.
Yeah.
And it's clear that he has that position because Gil-galad and the elves have such incredible respect for his father, and he clearly is talented and is proving his worth, but he also is kind of on the outside. And the fact that Gil-galad and Celebrimbor don't trust him at the beginning and don't invite him into their council about the fading light of the Eldar and the reason they're sending him to Khazad-dûm in the first place for Mithril, you can tell that weighs on him, and it kind of disrupts his worldview, especially when he's asked to betray the confidence that Durin has placed in him. And then within that, you start to see the cracks that would form of him trying to live up to his father's legacy and never being able to see his father again because his father is now ascended to the heavens, and his brother's long dead, and his friend Galadriel is gone, and now he's being asked to betray this, his other friend for the sake of his people, who will fade away and effectively die if he doesn't. And you start to see the cracks that turn him from that much more optimistic, hopeful, ambitious young politician into somebody who will be more jaded and world weary by the time of the Third Age, especially, as Aaron alluded to, after he witnesses Isildur keep the ring for himself. And I think back to that speech he has to Gandalf in the Lord of the Rings films, where he's basically like, when the elves are gone from these shores, who will you turn to? The dwarves, they hide in their mountains seeking riches. They care nothing for the troubles of others. And you're like, well, how does he go there? This show may give us some additional insight on that. And then we know why he thinks men are weak because of what Isildur did, but he's going to see a lot that will break his worldview even before we get to the whole idea of the prospect of a Dark Lord rising to consume Middle-earth once again.
I think also I think that's such a great point, Jared, about it, living up to his father, because I also think it characterizes Elrond as you see that he's a really, really good person, because how easy would it have been for him to gain acclaim and gain esteem by betraying Durin? How easy would it have been to sort of climb that ladder if he was willing to betray his friend and screw over the dwarves and stuff like that, but he doesn't, and he goes to Durin first. He tries to work this thing out, and I think there's so much stacked against him in this. You could sort of see him turning evil at some point with all of this stuff sort of going, all this hard stuff to live up to and all of these easy ways out, but he doesn't take it. And that's why he's still a good person even after he sees all the bad in the world, is because at his heart, I think he's a good man, so to speak. Elf, obviously, but so.
Yeah, it's sort of extraordinary, and once again goes to this is this is not Game of Thrones, that we know that throughout this character's whole journey he remains on the good path, and and is a very admirable person. He doesn't, we don't have to worry about him succumbing to darkness and becoming an asshole, which is great. I love the portrayal, and I am a bit, I joked before, I'm okay with the elven hairstyles. It was one of those things that I brushed up against initially, but I think I was fine just so long as they didn't cut Galadriel's hair. That was the one thing. I was like, Galadriel better still have long blonde hair.
I know.
Like, that's important. And so after that, I'm like, okay, fine. Take whatever creative license you want. I was too busy being upset about the fact that dwarven women didn't have full beards.
True. But we got dwarven women. That's something.
Yes, but no, and they do give Disa has
Yeah, she does.
sideburns
She
down
does.
here,
Again, maybe it's a thing they evolved. You never know,
Yeah. Or maybe, I don't know. Well, speaking of Disa,
she's amazing.
She is the loveliest character in all Middle Earth.
Agreed.
At least at that moment. Yeah, I mean, I think her love story is, I don't know, is one of the most heartwarming stories in the universe of Lord of the Rings and all of that. And we have Beren and Luthien, but this is sort of different, but it's cute. It's, I don't know, you feel something very pretty when you see them interacting, and the way that she interacts with Elrond, and I don't know, it kind of tells you a lot of how of the spirit of the dwarves, the character of the dwarves. I'm sure they can be stubborn, but in their stubbornness, they can also be very, very warm and very authentic.
Mm-hmm.
I would die for Disa. I think she is just her and Poppy. I would die for Disa and I would die for Poppy. But no, good.
I was gonna say I just love when we first meet her and that whole back and forth. You're staying for dinner. He's leaving. He's staying.
Yeah, it's not a question. You are staying.
Yeah. Well, she was I said I cried the first episode. I think it's actually the second episode. I was so incredibly moved by Khazad-dûm being just in general. I was so just seeing it in the Lord of the Rings, it's obviously one of our favorite musical cues, John, but it's just it's dead and it's full of rot and corpses and lifeless, and then you see this and it's beautiful and it's vibrant and green and it's filled with people, and then not only is it filled with people, it's filled with Disa. It's filled with love. Not just people and their little kids and the weird heads running around and stuff. Everything about it is just I said, I was so overwhelmed by how beautiful it all was.
And it is kind of bittersweet as well, because you know how it's going to end,
yes.
And you're like, no.
Yes, absolutely.
I again, I hate to this. There's no way for this to not sound like me continuing to rub it in, but I'm just was so thrilled that I got to see the first two episodes on a really big screen, because when Elrond goes into Khazad-dûm and just bears music and the visuals of seeing the vastness of Khazad-dûm, and then when Elrond says Elmendea, it just the grandeur of that was just and I was it was spine tingling. That's the only way to describe it. And again, keep harping on it, because we've got to. Bear's music, just what he did for the dwarves, especially in the show, and it's so in keeping with what Howard Shore established, and Bear has talked about the fact that legally he couldn't directly reference any material from the films, but because this takes place so long before, I think that works completely fine. What he wanted to do, though, was still craft a story in the same style and doing the same kinds of things that Howard did, and that's why I think it's just such a beautiful. The story is such a beautiful homage to what Howard did, but also like goes in so many of its own wonderful directions. And also, you know, I think you'll agree with me, Cecilia. There's more than one occasion where I not with the dwarven stuff, but especially with like the Harfoots and stuff. There's some Outlander, you know, sneaking in there, which just made me so happy.
I can feel it too. Yeah.
Yeah, and
It's not a complaint.
Yeah,
some of the
not at all.
Halbrand stuff is kind of Outlander coded as well. So yeah.
Well, as well as you know, the Halbrand stuff and the Southland material is also like you know, playing on our connection to like the Rohirrim music as well, with that damn fiddle and making us, you know, like cheer for Halbrand, even though like and I think even the musical theme is like there's I have to reread what the stuff Bear wrote up on it, but there's connections between that and like the Mordor music and Sauron's theme and so, but what I find fascinating about that is every time I go back to rewatch the show, I find all that stuff even more beautifully multi-layered because now you're watching, you know, his story through a different lens and but yeah, no, bringing it back to Bear's music for the dwarves, it just Aaron, that whole going into Khazad-dûm, it's just so thrilling and was very emotional for me.
Yeah, it's probably like, honestly, like even though it's so early, it's probably my favorite moment of the first season. Just like I said, it's so wonderful. Like even though you know what's going to happen, and sort of that's why it's so wonderful, is because like you sort of get you get an idea of what they lost, you know, like because we don't really see like a lot of dwarven kingdoms in Peter Jackson's adaptations. You know, we don't get to see the ones that are living. Even in the Hobbit movies, we never actually see, like, we see some of what was Erebor beforehand and stuff, but we don't see a lot of what it was like to live there. And I don't know, like I said, it's not only wonderful in and of itself, but it is just wonderful because Durin and Disa are so fantastic that it just makes it even better, you know. And the tree, they've got the tree in there, and he's like, "Oh, it can grow where there's love, there's light." And I'm like, I love these people so much. You know?
Please protect them from Adolkos.
protect them from the Balrog. Yes.
It's like,
and from
but when I hear and this is the thing, like, you know, you think maybe after years of Game of Thrones, we've been ground down into cynicism, but to hear something like, you know, where there is love, it can never be truly dark, or, you know, something to that effect. I'm watching that, and I'm just like, this is where my heart is. I as much as I love A Song of Ice and Fire, and I love George's writing and all that, but I am, like, at my heart, like, I'm a Tolkienist, you know, like that's where my heart resides, of listening to, you know, that kind of poetry and hope, and you know, and I'm just like, talking about protecting them, protect these people from George R.R. Martin. That's what I say. Because he would kill them off in a flat second.
George doesn't need any more characters to write. He's got enough.
You're right, John. It feels like they would walk out of Khazad-dûm and like into a jet engine or something immediately if it was George R.R. Martin's story. So yeah, sorry, Jared. I mean,
no. I was just gonna say, one of the things that I really love about what you guys are talking about with the Khazad-dûm and how vibrant it feels is just how much of like Dwarven culture we get to see. Like, one of the first things that we see when Elrond arrives and he invokes the right of Sigyn Tarag, this like Dwarven contest of endurance where you split rocks until one can lift the hammer no more. I'm like, I don't know if this is ever something that we knew about beforehand, but of course the dwarves would have something like this. And then one of the most evocative images from the early promotional material I remember was the image of Disa singing, in her full regalia, her head tilted back, kind of deep voice, raising out to the caverns. And there's a word for that. It's resonating. She's singing to the stone, trying, in this case, to beseech them to release the dwarves who have been trapped by the cave-in, but also she uses it to find new ores like the mithril. And you're like, this is such a cool idea. This makes the dwarves feel like much more like, lived in and realistic in their society than we've seen in previous adaptations, because we love it dearly, but in the Lord of the Rings, the dwarves are largely represented by Gimli, who is fantastic, but is also kind of a little bit more of a curmudgeon. And then in the Hobbit trilogy, we have our 13 dwarves, but who are much more diverse in their styles and shapes. But a lot of them are ultimately supporting characters, and some of them are in the movies primarily comedic relief. And then we have Thorin, who's kind of our proud heroic figure in that adaptation, and Killy, who gets to hang out with the hot elf, so he wins.
And Killy, the most Elven of them all, John, right? Or the most Dwarven of them all.
I will be forever grateful to the Hobbit movies to know that even dwarves can be handsome.
Absolutely. I love that. I love that development in the Hobbit movies as well. But really, it's just the idea that the dwarves have a society, and we see that for all the different peoples of Middle Earth in this show, and they really get the opportunity to explore it. And we'll delve into each of them, but the big one that I want to focus on with the dwarves is that seeing that depth of culture is so important, because it sets us up, it primes us for the fall in many ways, as you said, because we see a lot of ancient civilizations that have gone by and faded by the time of the Third Age in the Middle Earth. Dwarven powers are at their height here, and we haven't even gotten them, the Seven Rings yet. But we start to see the seeds, in the sense of, they do show us, the idea that we will come to know in the Lord of the Rings trilogy, that the dwarves delved too greedily and too deep down to the bottom where the Balrog resides. And one of the things that's tragic about it, but also important, is we talked about Disa and how wonderful she is, and Durin and how steadfast and loyal as he is. But one of the things that we also see is their ambition. The fact that they chafe under this kind of stodgy older Durin III, played by the wonderful Peter Mullen, and they push back on it. And it's actually one of the things about Disa is she's not just a lovely housewife who, is a great mother and, also a great resonator. When Durin tells her that Durin III has decided to seal off that vein, we see her angry. She's like, that mithril belongs to us. We should be doing something with it. We should be doing something good. And when you're king, we are going to dig. And you're like, that sounds fantastic. It's treated like a big affirming moment, but just very shortly thereafter, what do? They show us what's down there. They show us the Balrog, and you're like, this is where pride comes in and leads to the fall. And
I know it's one of those moments where you kind of wish you didn't know what was coming down the line, because you want to be like, hell yeah, Disa, you tell him, and then you're like, oh shit, that's gonna
totally.
That's the reason why I mentioned when I said protect them from at all costs. I mean, I also mentioned protect them from themselves.
Yeah.
Because well, I don't want to mention because it is kind of personal, but dwarves remind me of a certain family that I know here in my personal life, and they are very they're very passionate, and they are very stubborn, but greed was the thing that divided that family, and it when I mentioned that they reminded me of to elves, I mean to dwarves, it was kind of taken as a joke because they're kind of, even from how they look. Of course, they are they aren't short or anything like that, but they're like robust, and I don't know, they have birds. Some of them are even redheads, and they're quite you could have taken it as a joke, but it ended up being kind of, I don't know, foreshadowing my comment, because the family actually divided because of that. Was divided because of that, their greed and their stubbornness. So it's kind of sad, but yeah, it
Yeah, it's fascinating because it's a really good way to present that story as well. Like you said, Jared,
mm,
it's a it's a sort of interesting twist. Like Durin is not necessarily making the right call for the right reasons. Like
mhm.
he's maybe kind of making the right call for the wrong reasons. So you're like, boo, boo, yay, boo. I don't, like I'm not like it's going
Oh yeah.
against what obviously our favorite couple wants,
Uh-huh.
and so it's bad. But we're like, also though, so I just think it adds a little bit of complexity there to that that like he's doing what he probably should be doing. Although, again, when weighed against the fate of the entire race of the elves, like, what is the right, the right question?
Yeah.
There's a lot of complexity that it brings there that I really enjoyed as a story beat in general. It brought a
Yeah.
lot of life to that. So
And I
yeah.
love to see,
And
I love to see that in, so sorry, John. I love to see that in shows. For example, I don't know if you guys saw Andor, and
yes,
the
yes.
woman that worked for the Empire. It, she gave us like very I don't know, complex feelings. I had very complex feelings toward her
Well,
because
yeah, because at first we're like, yeah, you're a woman in the workplace trying to
go
rise up in
go
the
girl
ranks
go
and
go.
be
Then
able
you're
to.
like, oh man,
Oh,
who
but
am I
you're a
rooting
total
for, man?
fascist who completely believes all that shit.
Yeah, yeah.
Girl
Yeah.
boss all out. Nope, never mind. Nope. So yeah.
Yeah, and you're like kind of divided between rooting for her or hating her, and you don't, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Um. Okay, I have just realized that we've spent our entire first hour talking about the dwarves, and so we could honestly, I think we could just do the entire stream just about the dwarves, but I do want to get to other parts of the show. Um, I'm actually going to hold off on the mid roll just for a little bit here because it's because this is
Because no
if you
one's under
guys
any illusion that this is the
This is the
midpoint of the
midpoint.
stream.
yeah
So,
if
yeah.
and by the way if either of you guys have to leave at a certain point, do so if we're going too long for you.
Yeah, I got told about 8, but I'm good. So,
Okay. But yeah. So let's for now let's move over to Galadriel. I absolutely personally loved Morfydd Clark's portrayal in this. I am not one of those people who complain about, oh, but it's not quite Galadriel from. I think that's open to interpretation, and besides, even if it was a completely radical, departure, if you want to say that, then I'm on board with it because I think they're the version of Galadriel that we get in the show is amazing. I think she's complex. I love seeing the journey that she goes on. This notion of you know. Uh, pursuing this evil and fighting it against it until it so consumes you that in some ways maybe you take on part of that and seeing your way through that. But then also the manipulation that she's faced with at the hands of Halbrand. Um, and I just think that there was so much about that was interesting, and really just a great performance. And I'm going to say it. I just loved, aside from all the great character work. I love seeing her swing down from a horse and dice up some orcs. I thought that was great. So what's
like one of the there's always a problem with casting people like Galadriel because like there's people don't exist like that in real life. It's the problem with like casting elves or casting like the vampires in Twilight who were supposed to be sort of like paranormally, preternaturally beautiful people. And this is maybe one of the first times that I didn't actually have a problem because I mean Morva Clark is just like luminescent. Obviously her hair doesn't shine with the light of the two trees and all that, but like that's not really possible. But she's probably like, and this is the least of it, but this is literally probably was the first time that I was ever like, she's pretty. She's as pretty as I would have guessed. So like not like not quite. This was like I was like, nope, this is it. She is one of the most beautiful women on the planet, and I'm satisfied with the way that she looks. So, like I said, that's the least of it, but it was just sort of an interesting, like I said, a different thing for me. Normally, I'm not as impressed, but I very much was here. So,
I have to drop another note about the music. One of my favorite parts of the show is the bit of music that Bear writes for when she's helping to train the soldiers in Numenor. And it's just this great sort of swashbuckling, fun moment. And it just harkens back to like, the kinds of classic movies that, that I love. And I thought Bear did a great job with that music. It almost feels like a piece of music that it's very much of the rest of the piece, but it almost feels like its own, little, just wonderful, beautiful musical. I don't know. I'm trying to avoid saying piece of music for the 50th time. But yeah. So I did just want to point out that moment I thought was great. And once again, gets to see Galadriel, really kicking some butt. Which I don't want to. I don't want to create the impression that that's like the most important part of a character, but it is pretty cool.
I did have some issues with Galadriel. Not the fact that, not how she was portrayed, not the fact that she was a warrior, not the fact that she was angry. And I don't know. Something felt a little off with her for me. But I know that it's just it makes sense with the story that they're telling. It's just that I don't know. Maybe the comparison with against I don't know. The Galadriel that we see in the movies is quite shocking. I mean, it's two entirely different characters, and I don't know. Maybe for someone who has lived for so long, that she is still super, I don't know, super angry about things. Didn't really make any sense for me, but it made sense with the story that they were telling. And I'm okay with that. And I'm okay with the fact that she is a warrior. It makes sense that she's a warrior. It makes sense that all of the, all of the things. Maybe the only one thing that I found a little hard to believe was the fact that we are looking at one of the oldest and wisest elves in Middle Earth, and she got deceived by. Well, I know that all the other elves end up being deceived by Sauron, but I don't know. Something felt weird about it. I don't know how to explain it. I didn't hate her like all of the haters of this show mentioned. I do have a soft spot for her either way, but she wasn't my favorite part of the show.
For me, was so single-mindedly like focused on like finishing her brother's mission and her sort of grief and her anger over that I feel like that's what kind of maybe blinds her to a lot of stuff and makes her like maybe not as savvy as we picture, the Galadriel that we get in the books. I don't know. It works for me, but that's completely valid. I understand that. But for me, it's I found it a very interesting
It is
character.
interesting. It is interesting because, well, one of the things that maybe bothered me a little bit um, in the whole lore is that the fact that sometimes elves are not well, with the exception of the Silmarillion, uh, at least in the Lord of the Rings books and movies, you see elves as these supernatural beings that are perfect in any way possible. And what made Galadriel interesting for me was the fact that she was flawed.
Mhm.
And the same goes for Arondi, that we see him struggle while fighting as well. And you can see that gives some depth to the elves as characters in general, because, well, it is not quite believable that any being can be so perfect, especially when you're telling a story. And so I appreciated the fact that they gave flaws to the elves.
I did just want to point one thing out. Guilty. Her brother was Finrod, and he actually is named
Yeah.
in the show.
Yeah.
And that her connection to him is one of the things that really sold me on her character and her specific portrayal in this adaptation, because Galadriel in this show is the closest thing that we have to a central protagonist. I believe she is the only character who appears in every single episode, and we start with her and we almost end with her. And I mentioned earlier that that speech that Finrod gives to her in the opening sequence that really left an impression on me. I just want to read it off, where he says, quote, "Do you know why a ship floats and a stone cannot? Because the stone sees only downward. The darkness of the water is vast and irresistible. The ship feels the darkness as well, striving moment by moment to master her and pull her under. But the ship has a secret, for unlike the stone, her gaze is not downward but up, fixed upon the light that guides her, whispering of grander things than darkness ever knew." And then Galadriel responds, sometimes the lights shine just as brightly reflected in the water as they do in the sky. It's hard to say which way is up and which way is down. How am I to know which lights to follow? And then Finrod whispers the answer to her, which we don't immediately get, but then it circles back at the end, and the answer is, sometimes we cannot know until we have touched the darkness. That's Galadriel's entire arc distilled down in her very first scene right there. And I love that kind of writing because it really gives us a frame of reference to always refer back to whenever she's doing things that we might think, well, would the Galadriel that we know from the Lord of the Rings really be doing this? Because the Galadriel from the Lord of the Rings is almost a mythical figure. You know, she's very removed, she's very, soft-spoken, she's incredibly powerful, but she has chosen not to use that power quite as much as we might think. But one of the reasons for that is that scene that we get in the Lord of the Rings, the Fellowship of the Ring, when Frodo offers her the ring, and we get that famous scene where she is tempted and she becomes that, and she starts turning all blue and glowy, and she says the famous speech, "In place of a dark lord, you would have a queen, not dark, but beautiful and terrible as the dawn, treacherous as the sea, stronger than the foundations of the earth. All shall love me and despair." That's an awesome sequence. It's an awesome piece of writing. And this show calls back to that because whether it's apocryphal or not, whether it's strictly based in the text or not, this show gives her that moment paired with a scene when she's on the raft with Sauron in the vision sequence that is directly evocative of it, of the prospect of what it would be had Galadriel not been able to realize what would happen when she touched the darkness and differentiate it. But she does, because she spends her entire several thousands of years trying to learn that lesson because she's so blinded by rage. She's so blinded by her, desire for justice for her brother and for her people that she inadvertently, as Sauron says, helps him return. She indirectly inspires him. And it's such a fascinating contradiction because I love ideas about characters who are so committed to the idea that they're doing something morally right that they lose their way. And Galadriel's arc and the way that it's paired against Halbrand, and who's actually, as we well know, Sauron in disguise, like it doesn't go the way that you expect. And that just made her such a compelling character to me. I personally think that, as this show goes on, we will start to see her become more of the Galadriel that we knew. And we even get glimpses of that in that episode John mentioned, The Eye, where she's kind of having to reckon and do a bit more self-reflection and realize that what she has done has inadvertently contributed to this. And we start to see the scars that she hides under those beautiful flowing gowns and light when she takes up residence in Lothlorien later. But it really is essential that we see her as flawed because, as you alluded to, the elves, by the time of Middle Earth, the light of the Eldar is fading so much that the elves are kind of removed from the story, except for Legolas. But there's a reason for that, and it's because as their power, is fading, they have fought their battles, and in the First Age, they were the rambunctious or the reckless warrior, shall we say? Because they allude to Fëanor. The entire reason this happened is because Fëanor crafted the Cimmerals out of pride and ambition, and when Morgoth stood, he swore his eternal vengeance. Me and my descendants, of which Galadriel was one, will never, ever, 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 ever rest until we get these.
I believe that's a direct quote as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I clearly, the master Tolkien could take lessons from my lyricism there, but all of it is to say the idea that it is like Galadriel's performance in the show is unconventional. And part of it is just the fact that as a main character, she's got to have the arc, but she could have had many different arcs. And I feel the arc that they chose for her really was the appropriate arc to help us get into the world of the show. And it's all right there, right in the very first scene.
I do want to just say real quickly, Jared, that they may have sounded like I was teasing you, but actually I'm teasing Fëanor because I believe that sounds like exactly what he was.
I also think that I don't know if the show necessarily sort of realizes that maybe this is not like the Galadriel as well, because I do think they try to cloak a lot of this stuff in arrogance, and which I think people think of like when they think of the elves in this sort of version of Middle Earth, as well as this sort of arrogance. She's not necessarily politically unsavvy. She just is arrogant enough to think she doesn't have to like politic. You know what I mean? And she's so I think they kind of try and maybe like fit that in there, that it's like she's different because she's very arrogant. She's arrogant when it comes to like Muriel. She's arrogant when it comes to Halbrand. She's sort of arrogant when it comes to many, many different aspects of this. And that may be because she knows she's one of the oldest and most powerful of elves. She doesn't think she has to bend to this other kind of bend to politics. Politicking is beneath her because people should just listen to her because she's right. So I do think that they sort of engage in a little bit of trying to, like I said, to not make her naive, but just to say, okay, but she's an elf and she's old and really wise. And so maybe she's just a little too arrogant at this point, and maybe sort of being fooled by Halbrand is going to be one of the things that's going to take her down, take that arrogance down a little bit as well. So.
Yeah, like I said, I mean, I think that I didn't like her as a person, maybe. The thing I didn't like her as a person because everything else makes sense. She makes sense in the story. She makes sense in her journey, right? But I couldn't like her. I just couldn't like her, but not because I don't know. I don't know. I don't know how to explain it, but yeah, that's pretty much. I think that's the thing.
Yeah, yeah.
That's it.
She's not a sympathetic protagonist in
Yeah,
a lot of the ways,
yeah,
because and that's okay, because we have other protagonists in this story who are
yeah.
incredibly sympathetic, namely the Harfoots. But
Hmm.
in terms of our, Galadriel, we are meant to be rooting for her because we know that she's ultimately right, that Sauron is going to return.
Hmm.
And the part of the tragedy that she kind of helps enable his rise by inadvertently inspiring him is part of the the way that the story interacts with that idea, because as Gil-galad says, the very flame, the very wind that tries to extinguish a fire may also cause it spread. That's what Galadriel does in many
Hmm.
ways. So we're meant to be frustrated by her, but we're also meant to, see that her heart is in the right place. She's just lost touch with that heart. She's lost
Hmm.
sight of why she is doing this, ultimately.
Hmm.
Because it's not about vengeance. It's not about, like erasing this evil. It's about trying to preserve the light and preserve life in Middle Earth. And once she starts to recognize that, I think that we start to realize that this is the Galadriel that we know. She's just on an earlier part of her journey.
Yeah, I don't know, because I have heard that from other people that they find her unsympathetic, at least at first. I guess for me, watching this, and maybe, who knows, maybe it was what I was going through at the time, but I sort of recognized that, you know, that anger that comes from grief, and um, and I saw the pain that she was in, and so for me that made it to where even as I'm watching her make mistakes, and I'm like, that was not the way to handle that. Um, I understood it, and I think that that all comes to fruition in that scene with Halbrand slash Sauron when she finally sort of unburdens that and talks about, you know um the people, she trusted and could no longer distinguish her from the evil she was fighting. And um and I think that's something that we kind of see a lot in the world. Honestly, I know I see it myself sometimes, and so I don't know. Personally, I think it's maybe wrong to call her unsympathetic, because I had sympathy for the character, especially as the show went on. Um, but I get it, because I've heard it from other people, and other people who aren't, like trolls, and just making it their life's mission to be against the show, like people who honestly watching this with an open heart and didn't, at least immediately respond to the character. So that's fair, I guess.
It also just makes it all the more poignant when she gives up the dagger in the end to make
Yeah.
the rings. You know what I mean? Like it really comes full circle there, where I think she realizes at some point that she is not what she should be at this
Yeah.
point in the story, and so she gives up this thing that's a symbol of not only a symbol of her vengeance, but it's the last thing she has left of her brother. And that's as someone who's extremely close to my siblings, like your heart just aches for her. Like it is at the end of the day just sort of just a knife, quote unquote. It's not her brother. It's not going to give her the same sort of love and satisfaction that her relationship that with her brother did. But that's like ripping out her own heart to do the right thing here.
Hmm.
So I think that I do think she's not terribly likable throughout most of the series, but I think you're right, John, that this is for me, this is where my heart just breaks in 1,000 little pieces for her, because there's no way around it. There's no way for her to keep it and also save Middle Earth, and she makes the quote unquote right choice, you know, and it was really, 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 really meaningful for me that she chose to do that. So yeah.
And I think one of my favorite parts, one of my favorite situations that I saw on her was the thing that Jared mentioned earlier, that when she's in the when she's with Halbrand and she realizes that he is Sauron, and he's tempting her, and he asks her to look directly at the reflection in the water, and you see her gown, and it's exactly the same gown that she is wearing in the scene with Frodo where she's tempted. And that is one of the moments that I found most powerful about her character. And I don't know, it's just like I said, I didn't hate her, it's just that I didn't like it I didn't like her as much as the other characters. But that was one of my favorite moments for her, because you know that she isn't perfect, and you know that no elf, no human, no dwarf in this world, and not even one hobbit in this world is perfect, because they all have human, not human in Middle Earth, but human characteristics, and that is quite amazing. And that moment made me realize that this is a pivot point for her. This is the moment where she actually understands what she's doing and what she shouldn't be doing. And that, yeah, I don't know.
It also
just
looks like a painting. It's so,
Mhm.
so beautiful. That scene is just like I
Yeah.
said, Jared mentioned, I was just like, ugh.
Uh-huh.
I wish I had a picture for that moment, because it's just absolutely stunning. Just real quick, because I Mr. Sneak In wanted to say hi to Jess. Thank you for joining us. Yeah, no, but that's God. That shot is just so amazing.
Yeah, it's just
And
you see her at their lowest point, right?
yeah,
Hmm.
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and you know, jumping into another point of contention in the show, but one that I absolutely like. I've dived in and I'm completely accepting of it. The character of Halbrand as Sauron, I thought it was just great. And I become more certain of that on rewatches of the show, because once we're no longer playing the Who's Sauron game, um, you know, it becomes this fascinating portrayal of a character throughout the entire season, and the show plays fair with it.
Yeah. And it
So that
was
when you go back and watch it, you can
uh-huh,
actually watch his character develop as Sauron,
uh-huh.
and the things that he's going through, and he very often tells the truth in a very slanted way. um,
Yeah. Okay, go ahead, go ahead.
and I just love it, because for so long, you know, being and this is not meant as a, oh, the showrunners are doing it better than Tolkien. Well, of course not, but like throughout me reading the books in my youth, and you know, over the years, Sauron has always been this sort of, you know, idea. Even reading about him in the Silmarillion, where he has like a corporeal form, because you're reading, it's still not a, like, we're not visualizing the
Hmm.
character in the same way that I had become accustomed to other characters, like in the films being visualized. In the films, we get a giant eyeball on top of a tower. And so I find it so interesting to finally, in an adaptation, get Sauron as an actual, like, full-bodied character that we
Hmm.
can watch go through things, um, and get an arc for him, and see his moments of, like, not not understanding him in a way that, oh, he's understandable, no, but like just going through like the machinations of, like, his thought processes and all that. It's great to get a character like Sauron, who's always been this more of an idea than a character,
Yeah.
to get him fleshed out in this way.
I was like the most excited to talk about Halbrand because I think he's definitely like the most interesting character that they have here, because like I was so excited like to get, and normally when I say I'm so excited to talk about it, I mean I'm excited to talk about it, but like I'm more excited to get your guys' read on sort of some of the things like about his character that I think are maybe a little unexpected or anachronistic. Like, do we think he is acting the entire time? Like, why does he save Galadriel? Like, I mean, there's all these kind of things that I think are such fun and interesting questions. Was he trying to be a smith because he had this whole plan about the rings? Like, that seems like maybe a pretty long game there. You know, I don't know. Like, do you guys think that this, like, that's sort of Sauron? There's a couple of different things that I wonder about. One is, like, is he aware the entire time of who and what he is? And also, like, do you think that there's any of this that's genuine at all, or is it all just a performance?
I think it is genuine.
Yeah.
Although he can't entirely change his nature, but I do think that when we first meet him on that raft, he is not the same kind of like malevolent dark lord seeking to conquer all that we know from the Lord of the Rings. He has gone through, this sounds weird to say for a dark lord that is, you know, has afflicted untold horrors on the world, but he has gone through some emotional trauma. He has gone through some shit, as they say. You know, he was, as he tells Galadriel, he was one of the beings who was awake before the breaking of the first silence. And he was a Maiar.
I love that.
Yeah, and he was one of the Maiar who chose to follow Melkor when he became Morgoth and abandon the light and become a servant of darkness because he, you know, wanted power and he wanted to, you know, and he was searching for something. And one of the lines that I absolutely loved the most that I had forgotten about until I just rewatched the finale recently was there was when he is talking to Galadriel and it's on the raft and he says, you know, when Morgoth was defeated, it was as if a veil had come down off of my eyes, and for the first time in like many thousands of years, I felt the light of the One again. Mm-hmm. And you realize that is the moment that Sauron could have been different. He could have gone back to becoming one of the Maiar that, because many of them were actually sought forgiveness from the Valar after Morgoth's defeat. Sauron doesn't return to Valinor, but he talks in that moment about his contrition. He's like, I realized then that if I was ever to have any chance of healing all the damage I caused, then I needed to find a way to heal the world. And that's what he was in many ways trying to do in his own way, because as I said, he doesn't fully, abandon his nature. He still has certain set points that he cannot change. But he was trying to, in his own way, he does not think he's the villain. He thinks that he is trying to heal Middle-earth. But he does terrible things to do it. And then, depending on how deeply we want to delve into this now, it sounds like he was betrayed. Adar does, strikes out against him and, disrupts his power. And in that moment, it seems like he actually felt a bit of authentic despair. That he was like, I don't know if I will ever be what I once was again. And it's unclear when he adopted this identity of Halbrand, but the fact that he chooses this identity in and of itself, that he is not in this moment Anatar, the Lord of Gifts, the super fair, individual who we may yet see in season 2, he chooses to disguise himself as a mortal man and try to go off and live a different kind of life. And when he says in those scenes with Galadriel on Numenor, like, I've been searching for my peace for longer than you know. For both of our sakes, let me take it. I actually do believe him there. I do think that he is kind of at a point of despair, but also he's like, if I can't heal Middle Earth, then perhaps I can just, live a life where I am trying to do something good and have a bit of peace. And one of the tragedies and the brilliances of the writing is that Galadriel inspires him to be more, and she is the one who lifts him up and is like, no, you are Halbrand, you can be king of the Southlands, and brings him back to the place where temptation takes him over again.
Yeah.
And so in that point, he just, you can see that he could have been different, but the way that the circumstances played out, he ultimately chose to revert to what he was before, and now he will be worse than ever because he's had these experiences that, like, he passed through the fire and has emerged from it stronger, as he says, but it's, unlike Galadriel, who had that experience and is a bit humbled, Sauron now feels emboldened, and that will lead to everything that we know.
Yeah, it's a lot. I will say that I think his character arc in the season is a lot more interesting if he is being genuine in a lot of those moments.
I think. Okay, go.
No, just because it's just fascinating to watch him actually try and like hide himself away on Numenor and kind of get a fresh start, and that it's at Galadriel's urging that he sees something bigger for himself, and I do wonder like what his like ultimate goal would have been if the events at the end of episode 6 don't happen, if they actually get the blade back and he's just crowned king of the Southlands, and the Southlands are fine. It's like where does he go from there? Does he try being a benevolent king for a little while until his true nature takes over? And so many interesting what ifs, but I think it's ambiguous too, because I think one important note that when we first see him, and this I owe to the sort of eagle-eyed fans who are always looking for the smallest details in every episode, but like when she first goes on the raft and she first meets him, he does not have that Southlands, the thing that he wears that has the sigil. And then it's only like a little later in the scene that it appears. So you wonder if he then sees his opportunity in that moment to manipulate her from the offset. And so, but we just honestly don't know for sure. And I think it's really interesting then to watch the season and ponder each moment of, is he being genuine here? Or is he being an asshole and playing games? And so I just find that really interesting, because with Charlie Victor's performance, I can see it both ways. It's like, even in the last episode, when he's, even after she starts to have suspicions about him, and he says, you lifted me up, when I had like no hope for myself. I won't ever forget that. That feels really genuine. And then the beat turns and he says, and I'll make sure no one else will either, and that's terribly evil and manipulative and all that stuff. So I don't know. I have fun playing the guessing game with Halbrand throughout the season.
Yeah, I just want to point out something very interesting that Cassie mentioned here. That she says that it's far-fetched, but I almost wonder if he has a sort of Gollum situation, like part of his brain is echoing back to total influence of from Morgoth. And I found it, and that made me think that I don't know. I feel like Sauron and Gollum are sort of parallels
Mm-hmm.
in the sense that these are two beings that were, well, I don't want to say that the hobbits were like super pure or anything like that, but it's the purest thing that was able to defeat the evil. But Sauron, being a Maya, and being a Maya, he is one of these purest beings in this world, in this universe. And I like the fact that he has this duality type of character, as compared as Gollum. And and the tragic thing here is that we both know that what they chose in the end, and how things turned out for them. But I think that I haven't thought about this, but thank you, Cassie, for pointing it out. But it made me realize that maybe Gollum and Sauron are more alike than we think.
I think that's super interesting too, because I know like Peter Jackson talks, they talk in the director's cut about Gollum sort of, or Smeagol essentially, like thinking that he can.
Wait. Don't you mean Schmeagol?
Schmeagol. Like whether like he can change and go back to be this sort of other thing. And he sees Frodo and Sam and he thinks, okay, maybe I can, maybe I can do this. Maybe I can turn it around, and then he sees like the goodness in their exchange after, with there's some good in this world and it's worth fighting for. And it sort of makes him realize where he is in relation to all the rest of this stuff. Like there's that moment when Halbrand is leaving with Galadriel after he's been injured and all of them are yelling, strength to the king, strength to the king. And like, he looks genuinely moved by this, like this is, hey, maybe this is something that I could be. It's interesting to think that like maybe he was considering like, what if I was just the king of the Southlands, like maybe I could go that direction. And then again, temptation leads you obviously somewhere else if you're not good enough to resist it, but I'd never heard that about the pouch, and now I'm like, ooh, did he kill the actual heir to the Southlands on the raft and like take it from him or something? Or like, I've also always wondered, this is totally not to do with any like bigger thematic thing, but I've always wondered if he was controlling the thing that was in the water. Like the big, like, because he sort of should have some sort of power, right, over these kinds of things, or they should at least be on his side anyway. So I've always kind of wondered if he had manipulated that situation by controlling the thing in the water. It's obviously a little bit far-fetched if you think, okay, he knew where she was and somehow found her in the middle of the freaking ocean, but I guess it's not any less likely that he just stumbled upon her. So yeah, but I don't know. I've just always been very interested in that meeting and whether or not it was orchestrated to begin with, and I had never noticed the thing about that. So now I'm down a whole other
and like, no offense to anybody, but no normal person would pick up on that without scanning the episode for details. I'm gonna go ahead and pause here for a moment and do the mid-roll, because if this isn't the mid-roll, then we're really in trouble. But no. So next week, Jared and I are turning back to the Bad Batch, because this coming week is going to be the season 3 premiere. Jared, I can't believe how close we are. It's I'm very excited, but I'm also a little bit sad because we're entering the final season of a great show. So we'll be talking about the first 3 episodes, which are all being dropped at the same time. And then the week after that, we're having Blue Lemons and Laura come guest on the channel. We're going to be talking about the movie The Witch, which, as I've said before, I just saw not too long ago, and it thoroughly creeped me out. I can't wait to talk about it. And we can talk about this more after the stream, Jared. But as for what we do after that, there is a certain big movie coming out the 1st of March, if that's something you're interested in.
I was sure you were going to invite me to talk about Madam Web, but I think we may have to talk about Doom Part 2. at some point.
Yeah. So we'll see if that works out timing wise, because obviously it won't be on home video for us to watch over and over again before the stream. So I'm sure it'll depend on whether we both make it out to the theater in time. But we can talk more about that later. Yeah, and that's our schedule for now. And we'll it's time for us to start compiling the next month or two in advance for some more stuff. Yeah, so I'll pass it down to you, Cecilia. Do you have? I know you said your channel's kind of died down for now. Do you have anything that you're working on that you wanted to talk about, or?
No. I mean, it's just that other than my daily life, I'm not really doing anything right now. No, I'm pretty much deep into the corporate ladder, you know,
Yeah.
situation. Yeah,
That that's good though. We were talking before about how it can be a lot, and
yeah, it can. It's
yeah,
just that, for example, in my day to day job, I have to I have to deal with a lot of things. Not that it's extremely difficult or anything, but I have to deal with a lot of people, and I have to talk to a lot of people. I have to help them do their job in a better way, and everyone is sending me messages at the same time that I need to, and so I have to divide my mind in a lot of different in a lot of different there's a lot of different things that have to keep attention to. So it's difficult for me to save that mental energy to do something like this afterwards. So that's pretty much one of the reasons that I stopped doing my videos. I do miss it. I do think that is something that I will always enjoy, especially when we're talking topics like this. But yeah, the thing is that the things that it gave me when I was doing it for the first time, and the process that is no longer giving me the same joys that
yeah.
it used to. So yeah.
Well, and that's the surefire sign when you have to step back from it. I know
Mhm.
that I'm very thankful that I found the joy of doing this again, but there was a while where I was like, it's becoming another job, and
Mhm.
it's not giving me joy to go back to it. So I gave myself permission to be like, I don't have to do this. I
Mhm.
don't have to have this be part of my life, and I'm thankful that I did that at the time.
And you know that I'm
And
thankful. I'm thankful for the fact that my channel never really took off the way it was at the beginning, because I started out my channel doing reviews of Game of Thrones, and it
mhm,
started growing pretty fast, but then for situations in life I had to stop, and then I came back, and then I stopped, and then I came back as a podcast, and it never really took off. I never really had the I lost the momentum, and I'm kind of grateful that that happened, because I have friends who have become famous out of their YouTube situations, and it has become a job for them. They still enjoy it, but they have help. They are a team, and I was only me, and it would have felt awful to disappoint so many people if it had been bigger than it got.
yeah, I know when for a while I was very like uh, attached to exactly like, oh, what are the numbers for this video, and for a while when AR and I were doing the channel, we had gotten the algorithm to work in our favor, and and a lot of our videos were, but they were views of people who were just like strolling and probably previewing our video for 2 seconds. I'm actually rather thankful that I still like people like our friends to tune in and watch, so I'm sort of cognizant of that, but I'm also rather thankful that this is just a small channel where it's just me, Jared, and our friends, so that it becomes like something fun that we do each weekend instead of, oh, I've got to aim for this. So yeah, I'm thankful that it's just a fun thing to do rather than it turning into like a source for my livelihood or something like that, which I don't think it ever was going to be, because I'm much too mellow for for that.
It's also just a joy, like in the you know what I mean? Like it's you guys are wonderful, and all of the stuff that you do is excellent, and you deserve far more views than you get. Like that's for all three of you included, but like it's also just nice that I could come on here and be like, all right, the chat's mostly gonna be people we know. Nobody's gonna be a dick about this. You know what I mean? Like it's kind of nice as opposed to like some other things when you're like, oh, I gotta be in the chat. I gotta mod this stuff. Oh God, you know what I mean? So it is. I am always sorry that you don't get as many views as you deserve, but it is. There is also something kind of nice about just being here with our friends. Too.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, and this stream is an example of that. The fact that I haven't had to like block any trolls in the chat makes me happy. Yeah. But so yeah, Jared or Aaron, Aaron, I know obviously you don't have a YouTube channel or anything, but we're finishing up the mid-roll. You guys want to mention anything before we get back into the conversation?
Nothing for me. I just want to say I'm glad to see Jared's whole face rather than like the witness protection outline that we had a few weeks ago. So yeah, but
yeah, that was hopefully going to be a one-time thing brought on by circumstances beyond my control, because I was starting to feel a little bit shady with both literally and figuratively with when that happened. But fortunately, the issue was not recurred. We're still getting plenty of rain out here that we would not normally be getting, but that's good. But yeah, I'm just I don't have anything else to promote other than the fact that when John and I will be deciding on what else we're going to do beyond the 2 weeks that he outlined with the Bad Batch and the Witch on this channel, and we'll keep you updated as that goes along, because this is fun. Me not having a channel of my own, I really just have my Twitter account that I will use as that kind of a place to engage. It's nice because this has been an opportunity in my life when I have the opportunity to do something like this. I can't guarantee that will always be the case with the job that I work, but I'm loving it for now. So I would just want to keep it going and make it work as long as possible and talk about the stories that we love. So.
Yeah. And I will just say before we dive back in, Cassie, that's really kind of been my mission statement since I started the channel. I never wanted this to be a channel where I'm like, promoting negativity for its own sake. I think the most negative thing I've ever done was our Hobbit stream, but that was more fun than like I think even as we were kind of picking apart some parts of those movies, it was still done with love and admiration for the people involved. And
it was still 1,000 times more positive than pretty much every other stream about the Hobbit out there, So, but it was done with love. So
yeah. So yeah, let's.
Cecilia has something else to promote.
Yeah, I do. It's not mine, but I'll. Oh no, I couldn't. I wasn't able to post it here, but my husband is, as some of you know, he's a musician, and he's been uploading his music to Spotify, and he hasn't completed uploading all of his music to Spotify, but some of it is already there. And if you want go and want to check it out, just look for Leonardo Lopez in Spotify, and you will get look for the public playlist that says unknown misses. You will have the full picture there, because in only in the profile artist profile, you will only find two of his albums, but not all of them. So look for the Unknown Misses playlist by Leonardo Lopez, and yeah, I hope that you enjoy his music. Some of his music that he's releasing, he did it with me, and some he did it with other people. But he's incredibly talented, and he deserves the spotlight.
Ceci, if you can send me the link in the Slack, I can post it in the chat.
Oh sure, okay.
Yeah, as soon as you get it, I'll pop it up on screen. See, I knew if we kept going long enough, there'd be something to to promote. All right, let's dive back in, because there is like so much still to cover. Let's give the people what they want. I believe that there's a lot of you know, okay, we'll call it desire out there for to talk about these two, Arondir and
Me,
Bronwyn.
I'm one of those people.
Lots of people named Jared who want to talk about this.
Yeah, I'm a sucker for a good love story, and I just, and again, talking about Bear's music, it's, you know,
Their theme is
so much. Oh God, it's so great. And you know, I'm not gonna. I don't want this to be a conversation about about horrible people, but all I can say is screw all of you who aren't fans of Arondir, at least for the wrong reasons. He's an amazing character. Bronwyn's amazing. I love their story, and I love that these two are at the heart of, like, the big conflict that we get building up to episode 6. I love that episode because I guess I don't know if you would actually define it as a siege, because they're not in a castle, but it, at least, they start off in a castle, but then they go back to the village, but it feels like a siege. And I love a good siege, and I love their like pre-battle, speeches, and, and the fact that, it's just centered around these two characters and their beautiful story. It's great. But Jared, I know you want to wax poetic about these two, so go ahead.
Yeah. So when I was talking about the things that drew me into the show within the first episode, I've already kind of waxed poetic about the speech that Galadriel's brother Finrod gives in the opening, and just kind of the majesty of the two trees of Valinor. But one of the other major drawing in points for me was Arondir and Bronwyn, because I just loved these two characters immediately, and I loved them together because I had heard before the show premiered that there would be a forbidden love story between these two characters. And that was something that really intrigued me because, forbidden love stories between humans and elves in Tolkien's Legendarium are some of the best stories that we have within this incredibly, beautiful and magical world that he created. Beren and Luthien really are kind of the ultimate, love story, both, and, there are reasons for that grounded in Tolkien's own life and his relationship with his wife. And then, of course, Aragorn and Arwen, and Tuor and Idril as well, to cite the other one, pairing between humans and elves. But what was really interesting to me, just on the conceptual level, was it is notable that all three of those prior relationships that have been described in Tolkien's Legendarium are between a mortal man and an elf maiden. And when I heard that this relationship would be between an immortal elf warrior and a human woman, I thought that's great. That's fascinating. That's something we actually have not seen in this Legendarium before. But you know, concept only takes you so far. You need to actually believe the love story between these two characters. And it started with casting two incredible actors, Ismael Cruz Cordova, and I really want to get her name right because she's so wonderful. Nazanin Boniadi, who's an Iranian. She is an activist, a human rights activist. If you read about her life and the work that she does, she's just an awesome person in the world, as well as being a great actress for Bronwyn. And you know, the fact that she's a healer and that she is kind of a widow in this show, but she has this kind of connection with Arondir, who's kind of a younger elf. He's a little bit like, he's less of the magisterial Noldor. He's more of like the kind of ground level that we see. He actually reminds me a bit in that way of Toriel from the Hobbit. But the chemistry that these two had just from the jump was instantaneous and fantastic. And that scene where just in like the looks that they give each other and the kind of the conversation that they have by the well, I can already could tell that there was a connection there. And then the scene that really sold it for me was when Arondir learns that the elves are about to leave because of the High King's order, and he goes to see Bronwyn, and he's having trouble getting out the words, and she just looks at him and she says, "Say what you wish to say," and he says, "I have said it already in every way but words." And I was just like, oh God, these two, protect them. I let them be happy, and then they do. I mean, they go through a ton of shit, but you know, when we get to that moment at the end in episode 6, Udum, where they're having the conversation by the tree and about the seeds and new life out of death, and I'm just like, dear God, this is so beautiful and romantic, and it really, it's all authentic. Like the love story feels real, and then there's also another fascinating angle to it of the idea that, you know, Bronwyn has a son, Theo, and the fact that it's not just that the two of them are, you know, falling in love. It's the fact that they're forming a family unit with Theo, who starts out kind of prejudiced against the elves because of the way that they've been monitored for so many years, all his life. But then over the course of the season, he actually comes to respect Arondir, and by the end, they're a family. And I was just like, this is great. I love this so much. I could go on and on, but I'll let somebody else have a try. Other than to say that, yes, both these actors are incredibly beautiful for their genders, and together they make magic. So yes.
I will say, I feared when the season was starting off. I was like, oh God, Theo's gonna be that kid, isn't he? I'm gonna hate his guts, and then he really surprised me, and I felt so much for him. and I love their family unit. Yeah, that ire was saved for, you know, the I don't remember his name, that tool who, you know, is like a reject from the second season of Rome in Numenor.
Yes.
The young guy.
It's like Karen. It's because of the K. It's like something. I don't. Yeah. The one who's all in on Elendil's daughter. Yeah.
And it's not his fault. There's so many characters in the show that I do feel like some of the Numenor cast gets a little, you know, the short end of the stick, and hopefully a bit more development in season 2. So I say that with like, but still, he's not my favorite.
Yeah. Like who Theo's father is meant to be a mystery that we wonder about.
I wondered about that, just because they do talk about him, kind of being like them not knowing what happened to him, and given the fact that they allude to the fact that the people of the Southlands used to be loyal to Morgoth, it made me wonder, are they setting something up for future seasons where Theo's father comes back? But ultimately, I think the story in this season didn't need that. It just the fact that that Theo's father was gone and he kind of was dealing with a little bit of abandonment issues for that reason. I think helped sell the story of Theo and Bronwyn and Arondir coming together as a family unit. But I would not be surprised if Theo's father is actually not dead and he comes back.
It's because like especially the hilt, the sword, it seems to have some sort of connection with Theo and all this stuff. And I don't know if it's only blood or if we're even supposed to wonder about that. I feel like anymore TV has trained us to be like, how else can they put one over on us or something? And I know Tolkien in general is not like that. There's not a lot. Tolkien is pretty straightforward in general. Like what you see is what you get in a lot of ways. This isn't Game of Thrones. This isn't how Tolkien's not looking to screw you with twists all the time or anything like that. But like this, I just sort of wondered, like at the hilt, especially, as like, I don't know, are we supposed to, did he just find it and it can take anybody's blood? Or are we supposed to be wondering about his father? So again, it's the story that we got is certainly great and everything like that. Although one of my sort of small complaints about the season is I wish we knew more about Arondir's backstory. I would have liked to have learned a little bit more about sort of who he was as a character, other than simply that he seemed to be like a good elf who loved Bronwyn. So again, I already had my major complaint with the season, which again is not even really that big of a deal, is that I thought the pacing was a little off. I thought we spent a little too much time on the build up and not quite enough on the payoff in general. But again, like very, very small. And yet I'm like, I would have really liked to know more about Arondir's backstory. So I'm like, did I really have a problem with the pacing? Or did maybe I just want a little bit more?
Well, maybe to be fair, we're gonna get that on subsequent seasons.
Yes,
maybe.
for sure.
And I will say, like, a note on the pacing, like, and I'm fine with it with people who maybe it was a little too slow for their taste. But I will say, like, if you've read the books, Tolkien is not a fast-paced storyteller.
No. And
so
you know what?
I think people are so used to Peter Jackson's movies, which, especially the theatrical cuts that are like roller coaster rides, that is not Tolkien's pace at all. So coming from that angle, I was fine with it, but at the same time, I get it.
Yeah, it's just that people don't really have the patience anymore. They want shock factor in the first episode. And for example, the same thing happened when the same thing happens whenever I recommend, for example, The Expanse. Mm-hmm. People who are not patient enough to get to the fourth episode where the thing that has to happen happens. And so yeah, that's one of the arguments that the haters of the show had. So, and especially the people who is not like a hardcore Lord of the Rings fan, hardcore Tolkien fan, like the casual viewer that doesn't really understand much about the story. That's the main complaint, the pacing. Yeah.
And I think like it's not that I felt that it was slow. It's that I just felt it was a little unbalanced for me. Like I said, I think I wasn't like upset about the pacing until after episode 5. I was like, wait, there's only 8 episodes. I was like, oh shit. Like I thought there were 10. So I was fine with the pacing when I thought there were 10 episodes. But then when I learned that there were 8, I was like, oh boy, we've spent a lot of our time like on the setup of it, which again I thoroughly enjoyed. So far as this goes, I was like, oh damn, we don't have a lot of time to sort of pay a lot of this off now. And again, no huge complaints with the payoff or anything, just a little bit unbalanced. And like you said, I think it was a lot of like people who you were trying to get into this were like, does anything ever happen? You know, and I'm like, no, enjoy the world. Look at Tiza. She's great, right? You know, so the things that I think we as Tolkien fans can enjoy about it were maybe not quite as evident to people who were not as deep in the Tolkien lore. And again, that's not particularly my concern at the end of the day, but it did feel a tad unbalanced. But like I said, then I make myself a hypocrite when I'm like,
well, I'm a bit cynical about about other viewers anyway. I remember all the way back when Game of Thrones first started, and you know, episodes 1 and 2 had like these big like cliffhangery, you know, shocking, you know, endings and stuff, and then episode 3 just kind of slowed things down and, you know, got us into like the politics of King's Landing and all that stuff. And I remember some of the reaction for that episode was, oh, the show's kind of boring now.
I remember after the first episode of Game of Thrones, I watched with a roommate who was total newbie, who was like, sorry, what was anyone's name? Who were any of those people? So that was more of the issue there, where they were like 45 people were named here, and I don't remember any of them. And I was like, it's fine. We'll just keep going. So yeah. Anyway, sorry. That's like I said, just the one, like I said, the one thing that about, I did really like Bronwyn. I thought she was a wonderful, very well drawn character. And like you said, John Theo was not nearly as annoying as I feared he might be when I first. Anytime there's a kid involved, I'm like, oh, okay, this could go one of two ways here, you know. But I did want maybe just a little bit more depth to Arondir as a person outside of his relationship with Bronwyn, you know. And that's I felt like maybe there was some. Oh God. I feel like maybe there was some effort to get that when he's captured. You know, when he sort of does that thing, there's sort of an effort to maybe give him a little bit of an arc outside of just specifically Bronwyn. Because Bronwyn already kind of has hers with the, you know, they're humans and they need to, you know, their ancestors were all dicks, and so now they got to try to not be cowardly assholes like their ancestors. So she kind of has her own thing going already, as well as being a healer, whereas he just felt a little bit two-dimensional when it came to like a fully rounded character for me. That, again, not that I didn't like him, I thought his relationship with Bronwyn was wonderful, and like I said, all the words about love, them talking about the seeds and life after, you know, and I was just like, okay, this is really romantic and great. I just wanted to know a little bit more about him as a person, not a complaint exactly, just to, like maybe you said, Ceci, like maybe a thing that I would like for next season or something.
Yeah.
I do like that. I do have to say though that you know, it's kind of nice though that of the two people in the romantic relationship, that perhaps the less defined one might be the man.
Yeah. That's a good point. It's a good point.
Yeah. Sorry.
No, but I had a favorite moment with Arondir. And that moment is when he's captured and that he's crying about what is happening to the trees.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That was the moment that sold Arondir to me. Yeah. I fell in love with him in that moment.
Yeah, that is a great moment. That is his character, because that it kind of speaks to his relationship and his place with the elves, and the idea that, you know, he's essentially trying to save his fellow squad mates from the watch, because the orcs are going to kill them if they don't tear down the tree. And the fact that the elves seem willing to die for that, you know, for not cutting down the tree because the trees are sacred to them. But when he sees his friend killed and he realizes that the orcs are just going to keep killing them until someone agrees to do it, he takes that moment, and it could be framed as a moment of weakness, but it actually turns into a moment of strength, because he realizes he uses that moment to get up onto above the ridgeline and see the area where they could potentially make their escape. And then he says the blessing to the tree, and he asks it for forgiveness before he cuts it down. That's a great little moment there. And it tells you that this guy does have a life before he came here, but kind of like Galadriel, he or I should say Elrond, like he is kind of searching for his place, because he does have that conversation with Revion the Watchword where he asks, "What were you before you came here?" And he said, "I was a grower." And the Revion says, "Then you shall be returning to far more than you left," which tells us that this guy kind of came from for an elf, relatively, kind of a hard scrabble background, and he joined the Watch, and he's been kind of stationed out here in the Boonies for however many years, watching over these people who are supposed to be a threat, but really haven't proven that they are yet. And then, when it comes to the idea that he has to give that up, he doesn't want to, because he's found this connection with Bronwyn. As he says, "You're the only soft and sweet touch I've known in my entire time in this land." And you realize that this guy has essentially been living the life of duty, and he would love to have something of his own, and he ends up getting something of his own with his family. And I do think that going forward, Cassie is speculating in the chat about whether or not we'll even see Arondir and Bronwyn next season. I don't know. I haven't seen the casting for season 2. I do think that their story is pretty complete, but I also could see ways in which it could continue. And if that does happen, then I agree, Aaron. I would love to learn more about Arondir and his backstory, because the other role that he does fulfill in this show is that of the action hero. He really is our Legolas, who gets to do the super cool things that no human would be able to do, catching arrows, turning them around, shooting them back at the orcs, doing flips, all that kind of stuff, which is fun, but it's also just not like fully, doesn't tell us as much about his character. But then also the other thing that I just want to, but they could go anywhere with it, because the other thing I just want to commend both Bronwyn and Theo and Arondir for is these are all completely original characters. Mm-hmm. And they feel so authentic to the world that I think it's one of the show's greatest triumphs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Just a real quick, because we are going to have to move on in a second. I just want to spend so much time talking about every different part of the show. But speaking of these characters and tying it back to the dwarves, one of the most beautiful moments in the show is when they're running from the orcs and they come out of the forest, and you don't even realize that you're hearing Diza singing, over the sequence, and the sun comes up and they're able to make their escape. It's just this beautiful shot, and and then it cuts to the mountains, and you go inside Khazad-dûm, and and it has that great scene of her singing, and praying for the miners and stuff, and it's just like I was watching, I was like, damn, that's how you do a transition. so breathtaking. But in the spirit of moving things along.
Before we move on, I don't know if you're going to move on to the Hobbits yet, but I would say that before we leave the Southlands, we should probably talk about Adar, because he is the other fascinating and original character in this part of the story, and very, very important.
Yeah, and obviously I do want to mention real quick, there were some behind the scenes reasons as to why they're recasting. They've recasted that part for season 2, but I will just say that I absolutely love Joseph Mawley as Adar. I thought he was one of the best parts of the season, and so even if we're going to get a different actor in the role next season, but I still I want to applaud his season 1 performance, because he was great, and a magnificent look into the orcs that I don't think we've quite gotten, in at least in any other adaptation, and
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I
Orcs
thought
have
it was
feelings
magically
too.
done. Yeah.
Who would have thought?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that's one of the things that I found most fascinating about the character of Adar, because I mean he is kind of our villain for the most of the season, but he's so fascinating and complex with his motivations, and also just the fact that you can clearly see that he is one of the Eldar. He was once an elf. And I remember that led to a lot of theories about his potential origins. There was a popular theory that maybe he could be the character of Maglin, who was once involved, I believe, with the fall of Gondolin as a fallen elf. But it turns out what they did with the character, I personally thought was even more interesting, which is he is one of the very first Uruks who was corrupted by Morgoth to become his servants. But he clearly, unlike many of the orcs that we see in the Lord of the Rings films, he has a very strong independent motivation, and he remembers his previous life, which is one of the reasons that makes it so fascinating, that he is so committed to this cause of his new life and his children and getting them a home. But also that, like, as Cecilia mentioned, like, it's well documented in Tolkien's legendarium that evil can't really create, it can only corrupt. And so, like, the orcs are corruptions of the elves in that way. But in that fascinating conversation that Adar has with Galadriel after he's captured, and Galadriel is basically like, your kind is a mistake. We are justified in essentially committing genocide against you, which is a dark moment for her character. He kind of just has a very calm response to her. He's like, we are creations of the one, born of the secret fire, same as you. And you're like, wow, I've never actually thought of the orcs that way. They're always just kind of been our generic, bad guys. But they are creations of the one, even if they've been corrupted and twisted. And also, like, we see a bit of their culture as well, not quite as much as we do with the dwarves, but just the absolute reverence that they show Adar as their forefather. We've never seen that from the orcs before. Usually they're like, they're trying to please Sauron or Saruman just because that's what they do. But in this case, they're like, they are following Adar because they want to, because he is actually looking out for them. He, as he says, betrayed Sauron and attempted to kill him because he was sacrificing the Uruks for his cause. And that gives him, and he just said, enough, I will stand for this no longer. And like, his insistence on being referred to as an Uruk, not a slavering orc, that gives him fascinating depth too. And then, and that moment before he, before the battle, when he buries the Alpharin seeds, new life in defiance of death, which is the same thing that the elves do. And when he talks about the light and how we will miss it when it's gone, you're like, we've never seen a character like this before in Tolkien's Legendarium. He is a one of one.
Mm-hmm.
I just love the stuff between him and Galadriel. In that scene where if you were looking for Morgoth's successor, perhaps your search should have started in your own mirror. Oh my God, that's so good. Oh, you're muted, Aaron.
Sorry, Paul got pizza, so I was muting so nobody had to hear him getting dishes in there. So, but like, I feel like that was there were some people who thought that he was obviously talking to Halbrand in that scene as well, like that he was not necessarily talking to Galadriel, but that he knew who Halbrand was and was sort of talking sideways to Halbrand, which I think I don't think it's correct, but I also thought it was a sort of an interesting way to look at it as well. But I don't know. It's he's a bit of an odd character for me. He looks so perfect. He looks perfect. This is another one where they just really nailed it with both the casting and also like the makeup, the sort of more practical effects that they gave him. He looks exactly how I would want him to in this kind of thing, but he's a bit I still admit to being a little bit confused as to what his motivations are in general. Like, I don't exactly know if he's trying to make a world for the orcs, if he plans to fight Sauron eventually with an army of orcs. Like, I don't think I was entirely clear on what his end game was. And I think he also, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, probably was a part of my least favorite part of the entire season, when they cross out like the Northlines River and just write Mordor, and you're like, yeah, we got it. Thanks for that real cue there. But yeah, so that's
yeah, but not everybody, like, sometimes
right.
you do need to hammer it home. I just keep going back to that premiere episode of Game of Thrones, and you're like, that's Jaime Lannister, the Queen's twin brother, you know? It's like, and then some people still didn't get it. So like, for those people, I'm like, I understand why they did it.
True.
And at least it's not in the actual dialogue. It's like, you know, it's on screen text. So
for sure.
As ham-fisted.
No, and you're right, Jared, that he's totally original. He is one of one, and he's a good character. Like I said, he's just a little murky for me in the grand scheme of things in this season as to where he's sort of supposed to fit. Was his only job to make Mount Doom? You know, are we going to see? Obviously, yeah. If they've recast him, we're going to see something from him again. But and again, the answer is probably wait and see, Aaron. Just have a fucking modicum of patience and wait and see, you know. But he was just a little bit murky for that. So yeah. Right. Yeah. I'm sorry, the one and only Tinkerbell. I'm sorry, it clearly was needed for people for people like you. But yeah, so
yeah, I kind of feel like others' mission in the world is just to try to rebel against the one that cursed them, him and the orcs, because sorry, it has been said that orcs hate Sauron, but they can't help but to serve him. So I think that the motivations of other go in that direction. Maybe we will have to wait and see more about that. But yeah, I think it goes along those lines.
I mean, I think Adar is, I mean, as far as his motivations, like, I just see him honestly as being one of the most sincere characters, in that, you know, his motive, what he's after is exactly what he says he's after. He says, you know, his children deserve a home like any other, you know, being in Middle Earth. And as far as he knows, he's killed Sauron. I think he sees it as, you know, trying to achieve justice for, you know, for those, you know, who follow him. So I just think he's being genuine in that. If he has an ulterior motive, then I guess we'll find out in subsequent seasons. But
some of it feels a little to me like a reaction to a conversation that I think I hear sometimes when it comes to sort of Martin's, like, how did Aragorn rule after he became king? What did he do with the orcs? Did he cut down orc babies? Did he go and sort of like exterminate them? Is he still a good king if he tried to, you know, basically like the argument is sort of, did the orcs have any humanity? Was there any shame or any kind of, was it bad to kill them, basically, or was it only good to kill them? And so this felt like maybe it was a little bit of a response to that conversation. Like, these are beings with sort of feelings, and they can feel, I don't know if love is exactly the word for it, but it seems like that's what they're going for with this. So it did make me wonder if it was a little bit more of a meta commentary on, or at least that somebody heard that conversation and thought, oh, what an interesting idea. Let's go ahead and play around with that in Rings of Power. So,
I thought one of the most effective scenes in, portraying more to the orcs in this adaptation was, after Arondir and the elves tried to escape, and one of the orcs is laying there dying, and sort of the response the rest of the orcs have to that, and how Adar, is treating the orc and trying to sort of calm him before death. I just thought that was so interesting and unlike anything we've seen related to the orcs before, where, even in the books, like Legolas and Gimli are perfectly at ease having a game counting how many orcs they've killed during Helm's Deep, and so the orcs are just kind of treated differently. So yeah, I liked it, and I thought Adar was a really interesting character. I hope whoever they got, lives up to what we got from the character in the first season, because I thought they did a great job, and so great to see. Even if it's just for this one season, we got young. We got young Ned Stark and Elrond, and we got Ned Stark's brother and Adar.
Yeah. Yay, Benjen. And I was also thinking that too. I was like, he looks like Cold Hands. Like he totally looks like Cold Hands.
Yeah. There he is. I'll say on Adar going forward is that it seems clear that because he is continuing to season 2 and where we leave things with Sauron, that they're kind of setting up a little bit of probably a power struggle where Sauron, as we know, ultimately does regain dominion over Mordor and of the orcs, which probably means that Adar, dies, because we clearly see that one of the things that Halbrand is very genuine in is he hates Adar because Adar did betray him. Galadriel thinks it's because he, killed his family or something, but it turns out it's because Adar betrayed him and tried to split him open. But it's one of the elements that is almost kind of a tragedy for the orcs, in the sense that, they did not have a choice to be created. And they clearly are a brutal and twisted race in many ways. They still do evil things. But when Adar says, like, my children are worthy of a home, you could envision a possibility of the idea that if that is truly all that they want, then maybe after having, unfortunately, killed and seized the Southlands from the humans who live there, would they have been content with that? Would they not have tried to go on and conquer the rest of Middle-earth? They don't get that choice because Sauron effectively makes them slaves again. And I think that's a story that we'll see play out in future seasons.
Yeah, I think it's just a doom society.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so let's move on. There's still lots of different parts of the story, but I want to make sure that we get time to focus in on the Harfoots, because in many ways, for me, they're like the heart of this series, and I just like Nori and Poppy in particular need to be protected at all costs. Nobody better dare harm a hair on their head, because they're just absolutely amazing, and I fell in love with them pretty much immediately. I love. Let me make sure that I'm just gonna run through names. Obviously, David Wayman plays the Stranger, who by the end of the series we find out for sure is one of the Istari, and it's heavily hinted, in my opinion, that he is Gandalf.
That's a pretty bullshit line if it is. Gandalf.
Why do you say that? I mean, why do you say that? Why would you say that?
Yeah, I will say, just before we delve into how wonderful the Harfoots are, I love the Stranger, and I love the way that they went about this entire storyline, and I do think that if he is Gandalf, as it seems like he is, it's a great way to introduce him to the story. The one aspect of this show that did not work for me was them trying to use him as a red herring for, is this Sauron? Because I was just like, I get what they're doing, but if they were actually trying to sell me on that, they didn't really do a great job on it, because it didn't strike me as the truth of the idea that the Harfoots could be so wrong about this guy. So I'm glad that they didn't, and I'm glad that they played with the idea, but I could have used a little bit less of the mystery.
See, no, I'm gonna, and this is how people are gonna. This is just, evidence needed that we're, not the same person, or that I haven't hired you just to parrot all my lines. It actually worked for me because I thought there was enough sort of, back and forth of, because the character did seem like he could be dark in some areas, and I thought that, this whole time I'm thinking, is he the red herring or is Halbrand the red herring? And and then you got Adar thrown in there, who we don't get confirmation that he's not Sauron until like episode 5, I think. And I don't know, it worked for me because I could see it being very tragic for the Harfoots if it turned out that he was Sauron. And the I'm trying to remember what their names were. Shoot, I'm looking at names.
The trio.
Yeah,
we'll call them the trio. Were thoroughly creepy, that they convinced me that, oh God, he could actually be Sauron if they're, following him. So it worked for me. In retrospect, it wouldn't have been very in keeping with Tolkien if if the story went that dark, that he was going to be Sauron, and then that would spell, really bad things for the Harfoots. So yes, it does seem obvious that things went the way that they did, but I don't know. It was enough to cast doubt in my mind.
Yeah,
so.
I'll just clarify and say, I love that they play up how he's dangerous, how he's strange, how the Harfoots don't really know if he's there to help or to hurt. I love that the three mystics, the dweller, the ascetic, and the nomad are what they're called. And it's kind of implied, because people were asking about their nature in the chat. They seem to be kind of have a connection to the unseen world as kind of like spirits or demons of that kind, whether they're fallen humans or whether they're fallen Maya. It's unclear, but they are clearly meant to be demonic in that sort of way. I actually do think that element of the story works incredibly well. The thing that I did not feel worked was specifically the fact that of the mystery and the red herring element of them trying to sell me on him actually being Sauron himself. And that is more just a commentary on the fact that there was a mystery at all. Because from the moment that it was set up in the beginning, we knew that Sauron would be a character in this show. And we also knew that it was probably going to be a character we'd already met. And so that narrowed it down to a few key possibilities. Halbrand, who actually turned out to be the right answer, the Stranger, Adar, maybe one or two others who people had theories about. But I would say that that's an element of the show that worked much better for me on second watch. You had alluded to earlier, like being able to go back and see the elements of Sauron, in Halbrand's earlier portrayal. That worked much better for me. Like when you can see the way he's kind of couching his words and questioning his motivations. I just kind of feel like setting a conceit around the entire idea that who is Sauron is the thing that really only works on the first watch. And part of the reason I think it didn't sell for me in terms of this is because the character who was really so focused on Sauron was Galadriel, so it always made sense to me that she would be the one who encountered him. The Harfoot storyline is the one storyline that really doesn't intersect quite as much with the others. So for Sauron to appear there seems kind of odd to me. It makes much more sense to me that he is one of the Astari, whether he's Gandalf or not. So that's not, it's not meant to be necessarily a thing that takes me out of the show. It's more just an idea that the mystery surrounding who is Sauron, there had to be an answer. I'm very glad that it was Halbrand and not the stranger.
I just
with John on this one. No, I was gonna say I'm with John on this one. Actually, weird. We're gonna agree on something else regarding Lord of the Rings, but I'm with John on this one because I think we didn't know what this is the first season of the show. We didn't know what story they were telling here. Like, so I think it's easy to look back and say, okay, yeah, obviously he fit better in this story versus this story, but like there's nothing to say. We were saying earlier, like they play Halbrand as like maybe someone who could have gone a different direction. And so I do think as I say, I saw you put in the chat, and I think you're probably right that like I do think the obvious answer was Halbrand is Sauron and the stranger is Gandalf. But I think that there was always that sort of maybe they're telling an entirely different story because we just didn't know. So maybe the story is that Sauron tried to go a different direction and live with the Harfoots and all of this other kind of stuff. And like I totally get what you're saying, Jared, that he feels like he belongs more in the other storyline, but I think I was so not convinced of the story. I didn't know what story they were trying to tell that it did work for me to have, especially given the mystics were so convinced that it was Sauron. That kind of makes them look like dummies now. Like they don't exactly seem very formidable when they were just like dead ass wrong about the person that they were.
Well, yeah, but they were still after. Because both Sauron and Gandalf are Maiar.
Sure.
So for me, it sort of makes sense that that they thought they were on the right path and they weren't. And I'm actually hoping to see at least one of the mystics again, because I thought that I love their whole look and their vibe, especially the main one. I'd like to see them revisited. And like, yeah, that's the thing. Looking back Sauron fits more being Halbrand in Galadriel's story, but like you said, Aaron, we don't know what story they're telling. It's from, you never know where the season is going to lead, as it starts off. So, and both the stranger and Halbrand are set up as sort of proto versions of characters that we recognize. At first glance, yes, the stranger seems he could be, Gandalf or a wizard, but are they playing against that? Just like with Halbrand, we're presented with somebody who kinds of, superficially reminds us of Aragorn. But they're going to use that to play against that. And so that can be true of either character. And so for me, and also I want to state that, and yes, the mystery is part of the actual show, but also this is where social media can play a very bad role in how we interpret a show, because that dials it up to 11, and all of a sudden, like fan theories and even marketing later in the season, where I think the last episode, they really played it up, which I thought was a crass move. Yeah. It's important to separate all that stuff from the actual show. And like I said, I'm not saying that it wasn't also part of the show, but I think much more subtler than the larger conversation would have you believe. So the truth is, I don't know. Like, I didn't know who it was truly. I think I went back and forth at various points.
I definitely did.
Story. Yeah. So, but also, you know,
Yeah.
different takes is what makes the world go round. So
Yeah,
but I'm glad we actually disagree about something, Jarrett.
Yeah, and the reason, and just so we can tie it into talking about the Harfoots, which what you were trying to do before I sidetracked us on the stranger. I think the reason I ultimately believed so strongly in my heart that there's no way that the stranger is Sauron, even though, as you say, Aaron, that like we don't know the story they're telling. They could be doing, is because Nori was so convinced that he was good, and in Tolkien's legendarium, the hobbits and their precursors, the Harfoots, are so coded as the people who are, the humblest, the smallest, but they understand truths that sometimes the bigger folks do not. And the idea that Nori could spend her entire arc being so convinced that this guy was good and then turn out he's actually the greatest possible evil, I think that might have undercut her character arc for me, especially because she was kind of the lone voice crying in the wilderness when the rest of the Harfoots were so suspicious of her. Because the show codes us to love Nori and trust Nori, and she is, very lovable. She is also a completely original character, but a wonderful one, brilliantly played by the actress Markella Kavanagh, who, again, I'd never heard of before this show. But she was just so convinced that he was good and that there was a larger purpose that I was like, she has to be right. She just has to. And that's me bringing my own baggage to the show. But what I will say is that I do think it fits far more like as an overall picture that the hobbits and the Harfoots are the ones who have this understanding, because they are in many ways the true heroes of Tolkien's legendarium.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I was just say I agree with you very specifically on Nori. Definitely. Like, I think Nori, you're right. This is sort of Nori's thing, and we trust Nori, but like, I don't think the Harfoots are necessarily like good coded. I think their whole thing about leaving people behind is really fucking grim. Like, and then not only do they leave people behind, then they sit around the fire and they're like, oh, it's really sad about all these people we fucking left to die. So let's talk about their names, and these are not the hobbits. You know what I mean? Like, these are definitely a much, I think, like, I don't want to say grittier or grimmer, but there is like a dimension to them that I do think is much less joyful than the hobbits, or much less innocent, or, they seem like people who really have been out in the world and like know what the world is like. And I don't know. It's like I said, I do absolutely think you're correct about Nori. I think we're supposed to believe that Nori is good and true and kind and would never harbor Sauron again, except maybe in a different sort of story where she's trying to make him a good guy. Because again, I think it's fairly clear that the stranger doesn't know who he is when so maybe he could be reshaped into something else. You know what I mean? It's certainly possible. But the Harfoots in general, I found to be kind of I certainly did not like them as a people very well, because of their whole like, sorry, you got a broken foot, well, kick rocks, man, you're out. So
okay, here's the thing, because I do hear this a lot as it relates to the Harfoots, but if you actually listen to when they're memorializing those who, quote, fell behind, in a lot of cases they're talking about people who actually died along the way, not people who they said, you're slightly injured, screw you, we're leaving. I think that's like, we get that impression because of what happens with Largo, who, by the way, is like, initially, before Nori causes a bunch of trouble, they're not leaving him behind, and what pushes them to the back of the caravan is when she like goes against their ways and brings what they consider all this trouble. I I don't think it's their policy to anyone who's slightly injured, you're on your own. I don't believe that that's what we're being told. I think fell behind is largely meant as a reference to people who died.
I think it's also a reference to that. You're right. Yeah.
And so I don't know. I saw a lot of people have a more sinister outlook on the Harfoots. I'm not quite as down on them. I think they did have a bit to learn. But I don't think that they're wholly sinister.
No, I don't either.
Yeah.
Like I said, that's certainly not what I'm suggesting. They're not servants of Sauron secretly walking. You know what I mean? Like, but no, I thought that I don't know. I thought that their way of life was harsh in comparison to what we see about, sort of other, and especially given that we are supposed to think they're like the hobbits,
Yeah, I mean,
go ahead, Seth.
I think it's kind of like, since, like you mentioned, their life is very harsh, being nomads. I think it's a sort of situation on what is best for the most people, kind of thing, than actually being evil or mean or I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, they're a bit more practical than the
Uh-huh.
hobbits. I mean, like, granted, the hobbits we meet in the Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings are almost too practical. See Pippin's insistence that meal times have to be at a certain time, and God forbid anything ever disrupts that routine. But because they almost learn their lesson too well, they become a little bit too entrenched in their comforts of home. But I think that it is interesting to see them at this stage, because I do agree, Aaron. Like, they're not purely good coded. They are complicated beings. They're just they're simple folk, and they do value their sense of community. That's one of the things that Marigold says in the beginning. Elves have their forest to protect, dwarves have their mines, men their fields or grain. But we Harfoots have each other. Nobody goes off trail and nobody walks alone. That is like, and I think but it is kind of meant to be a structure that Nori, being the protagonist in that story, is trying to push out, because the hobbits have this mentality because they are small, because they are vulnerable. They're hunted by wolves. Avalanches can wipe them out. They've developed this mentality because they need it to stay safe. But Nori, being our young, adventurous, protagonist, is like, she has that beautiful speech where she's like, "Haven't you ever wondered what else is out there? There's there's wonders in these wilds beyond our wandering." And you're just like, that is the kind of the adventurous spirit that we as the viewer are meant to like kind of resonate with, because we want to go on the adventure. And her kind of being so convinced that this stranger is so important is her like trying to have that like adventure, even while recognizing her own limitations. As she keeps saying, "I'm just a Harfoot. I'm not important, but he is, and so we've got to protect him." But of course, the true story is, you're important too, Nori. Everybody's important. And that's why it's satisfying that she ultimately does get to go on the adventure. And that absolutely beautiful moment, like one of the moments that made me tear up the most throughout the entire run of the show, is after she's had this back and forth with her stepmother, Marigold, about, trying to keep her safe. And Marigold and her father have given her the blessing to go on the road. And she says, "I'll be careful, mother." And her mother just says quietly, "No, you'll be bold." I love that so much. That makes me tear up every time I watch the show.
But and then of course there's the farewell between her and Poppy, which just just reduces me to a puddle of tears. And I love the two of them together so much, and I worry that we may not see the Harfoots like next season, except for maybe Nori. But I would dearly love to see Poppy again. So
Same.
yeah, we'll see. But
one thing about Poppy that I really adore was her voice just felt, again, as a completely original character, just felt so authentic to everything that we knew about the ways that like hobbits in this world speak in Tolkien's writings. The one that always sticks out to me in my is when Poppy is talking, or Nori is talking about there's head sense and there's heart sense, and Poppy just shoots back, there's common sense and nonsense, and if you are all out of the former, you can borrow some of mine. And I'm like, are we sure Tolkien didn't write that exact line somewhere in his writings? Because it sounds so much like something one of his characters would say. Mm-hmm. And that's, I just love that so much.
Yeah, no, the two of them especially seem just so steeped in, like, you know, the traditions of Tolkien's writings about hobbits, and their back and forth banter is very, like, almost very Merry and Pippin. And yeah, I love them. I also do want to give a shout out to Largo, because I love his character too, especially in, I think, I don't know if it's the last episode or maybe the second to the last episode, where everything's been burned by the Mystics, and you know, everybody's feeling a bunch of despair, and he just, like, almost hoarsely yells out, "We're Harfoots!" You know, he's just so, like, he's not going to give up, and you know, and it's just, it's such a beautiful moment. And yeah, so and I absolutely, I did, you know, I loved God, it's too many names. Sadok, especially when they're all heading up at the end. He's like, "I'm going with you," and he's like, "Doesn't matter. We're all gonna die anyway."
He's awesome. Like he was such a great character, and it did kind of break my heart a little bit that he is the one who dies at the end. But his death scene is so beautiful as well, where he's just so quiet and just like, you know, the missus will be waiting. Now let me just sit here and watch the sun come up, and you know, it was beautifully done.
I was bummed about that, but also if we end up not seeing the Harfoots next season, then that might also explain why they went ahead and like gave him a death scene, because I would have loved to see him continue on, because I thought he was a great character, but it just depends on what we see with the Harfoots going forward. But no, he was great. I just feel sad because we should get more time to talk about him, but you know, we're hitting the 3-hour mark, and I know Cecilia, you have to go, and I suspect Aaron, you said you have to go as well too, right?
Sorry, John, I was just laughing though. You showed that picture of Poppy and Nori, and it reminded me of like one of their very first scenes is when they're like picking the blackberries. And they shouldn't be. They're like out where they shouldn't be. And that was one of those moments where like I had to remind myself that I wasn't watching House of the Dragon, because I was like, oh God, they're gonna die, aren't they? They're gonna die. And then I'm like, no, this isn't the story. Nope. I just expected at any point the wolf was gonna like jump out and take one of them, and I was like, no, this is
they ruined us they ruined us forever.
So, you know, I was just thinking about Poppy with, you know, her mouth full of berries going, "What's the rush?" Which feels like me.
Please leave. Oh God, they're gonna no. This is a different story. Different story. So yeah.
And one thing before we move on from the Harfoots to either the Numenorians or wherever we're gonna end this discussion, I would be remiss if we left this section without talking about the scene where the actress who plays Poppy, Megan Richards, has that scene. I believe it's in episode 5 where she sings the song. I love that sequence so much. This Wandering Day song. It's so beautiful. It's so, you know, authentic, and it again feels like something that would have been written in Tolkien's Legendarium. And I know they used lines from Tolkien, like the famous "Not all who wander are lost" line, but the way they just incorporated it into a song like that, it's
well, and
so
also that song was written by Plan 9, who also did a lot of the songs in the Lord of the Rings films.
Yeah.
So there's that connective tissue, which I just love. And yeah, it's one of my favorite parts of the whole series. And I love how the song comes back during the end credits, and that was actually a version that they recorded beforehand that they still wanted to use because the singer did such a beautiful job with it. So yeah, I love. So okay, here we come to a crossroads. I know, Cecilia, you said you have to
Yeah, I
leave
gotta
now.
go.
Aaron, do you have to head out now as well?
Pretty soon, like I said, and I don't have a ton to say about the Numenorians other than to throw them all into the fucking sea. But which is apparently eventually what happens anyway. But they kind of suck. So I don't. This is not going to be a place where I'm going to be able to add a lot of positive discussion. Again, I did not dislike those parts. I just don't think they're meant to be likable characters. So it might be a good idea for me to bow out to keep the stream positive, basically. So yeah, Muriel's
okay.
great. So yeah.
Well, we can just talk about the parts we did like, and that'll enable us maybe to breeze through it quickly. Anyway, Cecilia, thank you so much
Guys, bye.
for joining us. It was great to have you, and
Love you,
we'll
Ceci.
see you later. Bye.
Love you too. Bye.
All right. Okay. Yeah. Let's do a little bit of Numenor, because did you?
I like the Numenorians, so I'll take the lead.
I know. And truth is, like, okay, some of the younger people took issue with, but I love Muriel. I love Elendil. I think Elendil is absolutely fantastic. And I love what they did with coming into Numenor. I love Bear's music for that. It was very reminiscent of the first time we see Minas Tirith. Not the kind of music, but like the grandeur of the scene, and like taking everything in. I thought it was just absolutely amazing. I will say my love for Elendil is a little bit rooted in the fact that Lloyd Owen played in the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles as Indy's father in that series, a role made famous, of course, by Sean Connery in The Last Crusade. And I actually didn't realize it was him initially, but then I quickly found out, and I was like, oh, that's so cool. This guy who, was associated to this thing when I was younger, and he seemed like an old guy to me then. And now he's in this, and he's older, but he seems a lot more badass.
He's still very handsome too. So
yeah. Oh yeah. And he's very he's like, if Haldir is superficially kind of coded as Aragorn, I think that Halbrand. Who did I say?
Haldir.
Haldir.
Sorry. Halbrand.
Rip.
Yeah. Oh, well, it's 3 hours on. What do you expect? Then Elendil really embodies, that lineage, and he's very evocative of Aragorn. So yeah, I loved him. I thought Muriel was great. Very strong leader, and someone who we only know a little bit about from obviously pages of the Silmarillion and the appendices and stuff. And I thought that was great. I worry for her going into the future of the show, beyond just the fact that she can't see anymore. What awaits her is not good. So, but she ends on a badass note. Numenor will return, and I'm like, yeah, but Good
Not for
things aren't
very
in store for
long.
you. But go ahead, Jared.
So what I'll say about the Númenóreans is there are certain character beats within the Númenórean characters that I do think are not handled the best, specifically related to Isildur and Kemen, Farazan's son. But I do like those characters still. I do like Isildur, although I find the way they ended his story, given the fact we know he survives, to be kind of a weird choice. But regardless, apart from that, I really like the central conflict that they set up in Númenor is the one that is going to define the entire Númenorian story, which is the idea of the faithful versus the king's men. And we see the seeds of that with Muriel having to kind of put on airs about not being truly faithful to the Valar and the elves because it's not politically popular. And we see Farazan, even though he's not yet king, kind of helping to stir up those tensions. And I do like getting to see him as more of the statesman, somebody who actually would, win the hearts and minds of the people to a cause that is ultimately unjust. And Elendil was just perfect. I love the way that they portrayed him in this season. But the central idea of like the faithful and how they have to go about trying to follow the true path, even at great sacrifice, like with that wonderful scene that Elendil and Muriel share as they're on the ship back to Númenor, like following the true path no matter the cost. I think that is a strong thematic basis for the story that they're setting up in future seasons. The fact, it is notable that for most of the season, the Númenóreans are they're in Galadriel's story. And because Galadriel is our protagonist, they kind of become a little bit more of an obstacle to her until she convinces them to join her. And I think that's where some of my frustrations came in with them. But I do love the world. I think it's beautifully realized. The fact that, again, we get to see freaking Númenor on screen, gorgeous, beautifully handled. And our central characters, like the central family unit that we have of Isildur and Elendil and Eärien, another completely original character who she kind of holds an interesting place because, as far as I can recall, I don't think she's mentioned, and that tells me that her fate is probably not going to be the best.
She's a character that does not exist.
And some people might have a problem with that, and I understand that, but I personally think she's kind of an interesting addition because it's, she clearly loves her family, she loves her brother, she loves her father. But we also see her kind of being pulled more into that conservative element with her connection with Kemen. Like, she doesn't want them to go to Middle-earth. It makes me wonder if there could be more of a schism coming up, particularly with that scene at the end with the Palantir. So I think she could become a very interesting character going forward, albeit one who probably is not going to survive the events of the show. And it also is strange to me that they mention Anarion, but he's not in the show, at least yet. I don't really know what he's meant to be doing.
Well, I feel like they're saving that part of Númenor for a further season, and we'll see if we get that next season, because I'm very interested to go over there and see what they've got going on, because we only hear about it in the first season. So I think it'll be very interesting to see what the society is like over there. And I will say, I'm not totally thrilled about the direction that Eärien is being pulled into, but I did have feelings about her watching the season, so I hope she gets on a
Emma Horvath's a pretty lady.
I feel like you've got the one of the meme is "If evil, why hot?" And
I don't think Aryan is meant to be evil. I think she's meant to be. I think she's meant to be our sympathetic viewpoint onto the side of the conflict that ultimately will be unsympathetic. Because I think Farazan's going to make a pretty hard heel turn if you know anything about that character.
Yeah, because
she's got good things coming up. So yeah.
Yeah, well, and we do need a character who is sympathetic, who is leaning in that direction, at least initially, because we're not going to get it from the other, make Numenor great again crowd. Which all of them, I agree, Aaron, all of those assholes can drown.
Yeah. Well, it seems like, I don't know, maybe next season we'll get more people like Elendil, but like, it does really seem like most of Numenor is these, make Numenor great again without understanding that you were given this in the first place, like this whole thing is just, I don't know. And again, maybe that's why it bothers me so much. It hits a little too close
but also
to reality.
That speaks to the sort of schism between the elves and mortal men of, like, to the elves, they're like, y'all don't remember that this happened? And the mortals are like, no, we don't remember. We weren't freaking there. All right. Those were our ancestors, like, a long time ago. So, and I think that theme is also, like, it's also part of the Durin and Elrond story of the different ways that elves and, and mortals, look at the passage of time and death and all that stuff. I love the scene where the two of them are on the lift and Elrond's just like, if I've offended you in some way, and Durin's like, how can you not get what this is about? I haven't seen you in 20 years. That might be the blink of an eye to you. That's a sizable portion of my life. And so I do think it's very interesting to explore that. I think that we just need to get a bit more three-dimensionality with the characters in Numenor. And I think Aryan is probably part of that. But we do need to get that viewpoint explored in ways that are a bit more nuanced than I feel we got in season 1, which, again, like, this is a big show with a huge ensemble. I get why some of the stuff wasn't given as much exploration and like I said, nuance as other things were. But that's part of the joy of a series that goes on for multiple seasons. It's my hope that we will get that. And
certainly maybe I will like Numenor a little bit better going forward. I don't know, but I think probably it's just a personal preference where, like, you can see the direction that it's going, and I don't like it, like, I don't like that they're probably going to kill Muriel. I don't like that, you know what I mean? Like, I will say the choice to make her blind, I thought, was a really, like, interesting, it is a really interesting choice, just because, like, obviously people who are blind live full and healthy lives, but when you're in this place like Numenor that's so political, like, being blind is such a huge disadvantage when you can't see what's going on around you, when you can't read faces, when you have to sort of, like, when you're trying to be politically savvy and you can't see anyone, like, you have to learn to rely on other things than what you've relied on. Like, they're really setting Muriel up for failure, and that's unfortunate because she's glorious, like, she's glorious, and I want her to rule forever and save the whole island of idiots from being drowned. But she just, you can just see where it's going, and it feels like that sort of Damocles, like, hanging up there. And I don't personally enjoy that plot, but it's maybe like you said, John, in the future, and Jared both, maybe if they sort of round it out a little bit better, I'll find more joy in it in future seasons. So,
well, and it's funny because it's not dissimilar from what I remember hearing when Return of the King came out about the Gondorians. I know some people were, because everybody was so hopped up on how sympathetic the Rohirrim were and how much they loved the horse culture and all that stuff. And then we go to Gondor, and some people were like, well, the Gondorians just seem like a bunch of dicks.
pretty dour. Yeah, just not real sympathetic. You're right. Yeah.
But no, but I think ultimately the tragedy of Numenor is going to be like felt in sort of in the connections we have to characters that that we do love. I'm fully in on Elendil, and Isildur is certainly different from, I think, what I expected, because we have a certain image of him just from like the prologue of Lord of the Rings, and I think it's sort of interesting, where they've gone with him. But I want to see a bit more from him going forward. That's not just like this, young guy who's chafing under, what others want for him. But I do think like we've got 4 more seasons until he gets to the last alliance, and so I'm very interested to see where they carry him, because I think the fact that he's very different from what I expected alone is a really good thing, because I think there's this tendency to look at Isildur and like his fate is already sealed. So he's just eternally seen as, the the dick of Numenor.
I think Taker put it, fail son Isildur got old.
Yeah.
And I think that's right. He is sort of the ultimate fail son at the end.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And that is one of the things that they have to with the character of Isildur, knowing what we know. Even somebody who hasn't read Tolkien's extended writings knows about Isildur, because he features so prominently in the Lord of the Rings itself, as with Aragorn being Isildur's heir, and the One Ring being Isildur's bane. So we know that the character of Isildur is ultimately doomed. And we know that Numenor is doomed. It can be tricky to make them sympathetic when we know that their story ultimately needs to end in failure. But that's one of the things I recall when, in the lead up to the show, the writers talked about they wanted to make Isildur more of a different character, so we understood his journey, so that ultimately we would feel like his story ends in tragedy and not folly. And I think that they kind of started on that path by giving him this deep yearning to want something more from the world, and like the search for the real Numenor. Because he's right, the Numenor that we see in this show is not actually Numenor at its peak, at least in terms of its moral virtue. It's still incredibly rich and successful and powerful, but it has kind of lost its way, because it has broken with the faith of the Valar and the elves largely. And Isildur is ultimately going to be one of the characters who survives the destruction of Numenor, along with Elendil and Anari. And so we have to feel like there's a reason why that his path leads him to ultimately take the right path to go to Middle Earth, and to he becomes the founder of Gondor in that way, or one of the key figures. But we have to see that he's not at that stage yet. He is really at the beginning of his journey, and that can lead to some frustrating moments, like the moment when he lets the line slip on the ship so that he can get dismissed. That is just an ultimate why?
You need to drag everybody else down with you, buddy.
Yeah, but it's also like, I do feel sympathetic to him in that moment, because clearly he is being pushed towards a life that he does not want for himself, and ultimately he will be king. And
I do feel for him when like Elendil just says, "Can you not just trust that I have your best interest at heart?" Nobody wants to be told that. It's like it's true. So like, yeah, I do think he's understandable in that way. It'll be interesting to see. It'll actually be really interesting to see him in a place where he's on his own, with a completely different set of characters for next season. And So yeah, and as far as Numenor goes, I think it'll also be really interesting once we get to see the other part of Numenor, and what are the people over there like, you know, and are those people we may very well be more sympathetic towards, and so yeah, I'm looking forward to that. Yeah, did we? Was there a major story in the series that we didn't touch on? I
No,
don't think so.
Creation
But,
of the rings.
no,
but,
yeah, I was gonna say
Oh,
that's kind of the big one.
yeah,
But we did touch on it with the fading light of the Eldar, and how it connects to the idea that like the elves are fading and they need the light of the trees that is embodied in the mithril to continue their presence in Middle Earth, or else they will have to diminish and go into the West. But it is notable that the first season of The Rings of Power really has that as kind of an undercurrent, and we don't get the actual Rings of Power until the finale. And
which, by the way,
yeah.
It's just such a like. The only reason I overlooked it is, again, it's it's nearing 3.5 hours. Forgive me, but
and again, it's right at the end. It's more tied into Galadriel and Halbrand than anything else, like than an actual thing in and of itself. But yeah,
and we did touch on their confrontation. Once she finds out who he is, but the actual forging of the Elven rings is so breathtakingly beautiful. And I was looking for an excuse to bring Bear's store back into the conversation, and like he's basically given full reign over that final sequence to just do his thing with the visuals, and we don't really get any dialogue, but the actors get a chance to just do some amazing work. I haven't been able to sing the praises of Charles Edwards as Celebrimbor. He was just absolutely amazing. And you can see his hubris and the folly there. And the way he just looked so proud of his work, as the rings are being forged, and then he's showing it off. It's like, everybody else is, Elrond and Galadriel are kind of like getting the gravity of the moment and the situation, and he is too, but he looks like he's split between that and like, look, I'm damn good at my job. Yeah. But just I remember watching the sequence and just I can only say like spine tingling, just because it's one of those things that you never dreamt you were going to see on screen. Like it's and I've had that so many times watching this show of, yes, are large parts of the story that have had to be invented, because what we get in the books about the Second Age is not really a story. It's just a historical summary of some major events, but they have had to craft this story over the course of a season of television, but nonetheless there are very important moments and things that we know of from the books, and the forging of the rings is a big one. And so just to be able to witness that unfolding on screen, I was like, oh my God, goosebumps. So yeah, I love the way they ended this season. It was extremely powerful.
Yeah, the moment when they're talking about the what they need to do to perpetuate the light from the small amount of mithril they have, and initially it's like they're going to make an object like a crown, and then and then Halbrand / Sauron says it's too much power for one object, we're making two. But then the moment when Galadriel at the end is like, we must make three. that sent chills down my spine. That moment when they
one will corrupt, two will divide, but with three there is balance.
Yeah.
I will say guilty. In the books, the three were forged after the 9 and the 7, but they reversed it for the show, which is fine. I think that's, you know, for dramatic purposes, I think it works beautifully.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, that's the kind of thing that you can get hung up on the lore, and I do understand if people are upset about that, because it is an element that is directly from Tolkien's writing. But I also think for the story purposes and the story that they were telling in this season, ending with the forging of the 3 rings was the right choice. And we will clearly see the forging of the 7 and the forging of the 9 and the forging of the 1 in upcoming seasons, which will be phenomenal to witness. But yeah, it was an awesome moment, and I love, as we just had discussed earlier, the fact that Galadriel has to give up her dagger, her last connection to her brother, to Valinor, to help them forge the rings, was a beautiful grace note touch that was something that didn't necessarily, I wouldn't have necessarily predicted that, but the moment you see it, you're like, that's just thematically and narratively perfect.
Yeah, it's just one of those things, like, you're like, oh, of course, that's the, you know, ending note of this, you know, and it's so beautiful. Which, and by the way, like, we haven't had time to like praise all, you know, all of the technical aspects of the show. Like, you know, obviously the visual effects are out of this world, the you know, places they shot and everything. Right now, I'm just going to zero in on the costume design.
I was just saying, but also I would like to get married in that dress. So
yeah. This dress in particular is just, I mean, all of Galadriel's costumes in particular are just out of this world. So yeah, it's fantastic. They should have, like, Aaron's gonna laugh at this because I always like to pretend like I'm so above the awards, and then I show my true colors. But
one of my favorite things about you.
But this show should have gotten showered with so many more nominations at the Emmys than it did. And yeah, it's just like, even if you don't like the show, it's gorgeous from top to bottom in every respect.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, the technical craftsmanship of this show is immaculate, and while much has been made about its cost and the fact that Amazon paid an exorbitant amount of money just for the rights to this thing, and then is probably going to spend about $1 billion on it over the course of its entire run, I get that some people think that is a little bit excessive, but what I will say is one of the great virtues of that is that the money is on screen. You know, the work that the artisans who create the world of the show put into it, whether it's the costume designers, the production designers, the weapons manufacturers, basically the everyone who like create, you know, the horse masters, and like all of this, and the visual effects artists and the sound designers, it all is top-notch craftsmanship, and it makes the show feel real, because it really goes without saying, for a show like this, if like there are some shows where the strength of the acting and the writing and the performances can carry it, for a show like this, you really needed to be immersed in the world itself. It could not look cheap, and it doesn't. It looks phenomenal.
Well, especially coming after, you know, the films, like, you can't just create a, you know, a subpar visual representation of Middle Earth. Like, you needed to go all in on this story, and I'm so glad they did, because this looks like any other first season of a show that I've ever seen. So yeah, I mean, even like Game of Thrones had a great first season, but you could see the like even as much money as they poured into it, it had budgetary constraints that first year.
Tyrion gets knocked out and is asleep through the whole battle. You're like, okay. That was some budgetary constraints there. So
yeah. Well, and they were taking their lead from what Rome had done on HBO, because Rome didn't really show battles, except I think they showed one in season 2, and it was very like low key. Yeah. So how things have changed.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah. So anyway, so I think that's a good place to wrap up. Just thank you, Aaron, for staying a bit longer. I know you.
Of course.
Probably like
I'm starving poor Paul here, but yeah. So we wait a few more minutes. Yeah.
I really got worried when I looked up at the clock that first hour, and it was like almost an hour in. We were still talking about the dwarves. I'm like, shit.
We spent the majority of our time on that. It's fine. So yeah, most time.
I'm not upset. I'm happy about that. Just any final comments about the show before we close out?
I do have one, and it could have potentially opened up a larger topic, but I actually think it's fitting that we leave it here at the end, just so we can be more of a declarative statement. We haven't touched that much on the fact on just how diverse this show is in its cast, and it is a good thing that we didn't feel like we had to, because that has been one of the points of controversy about this show that really has no meaningful substance to it whatsoever.
Totally.
The fact of the matter is, this show does have a diverse cast. It has actors from all racial and ethnic backgrounds playing elves, dwarves, humans, Harfoots, and it's great. You know, they all do a phenomenal job. They were the best actors for their roles. They are part of the world of the show. It does not break the immersion. And the one hard line that I have with this show is, if anyone grounds their substance in the idea that the racial and ethnic diversity of this show is a reason that they don't think it's good, their criticism is absolutely worthless to me, irrespective of anything else they think about the show, because these people belong, these actors belong, these characters belong. And I am just glad that we can say that it's past time that the fantasy world, because this is one of the opportunities for racial diversity. Like, it should not break the immersion of your immersion to have like elves of different skin color. You know, if you can imagine anything in this world, why can't you imagine that? That says far more about you than it does about the show itself. And I'm glad that we were able to have a conversation where that was just assumed, and we could talk about so many of the other elements of the show that we love so dearly, because all of us knew these actors are great and they belong.
Agreed.
Because I had definitely thought about this, and it was something that I didn't want to like overly dwell on, because as I was watching the show, especially, you know, the show's been out for a while now, and removed from all that bullshit conversation, I was sitting there and I was sort of, you know, not marveling, because, you know, it's not really, but like, I was very happy and content with how little any of that mattered, that I was just sitting there watching a story with great characters, and thankfully I didn't have to listen to all that, you know, crap about people being upset about, you know, people of different skin colors playing these roles or whatnot. They were just the characters, and yeah, I have absolutely no stomach for all that, and I'm so grateful to have a good quality people in our chat tonight, and to not have to deal with, you know, any of the assholes. And you guys were great, and this is definitely one of those times when I'm happy that this is a really small channel with a limited reach, because I knew that we probably wouldn't be having to deal with any of that unless somebody was purposely just looking for streams to crap on. And but thankfully that was not the case. And I'm very grateful to you all. And yeah, I agree 100%, Jared.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Any final comment about the show, Aaron?
No, I just yay. Okay. I loved it. I got to visit one of the filming locations in New Zealand. That was really nice on my Lord of the Rings tour. It was owned by this family who was delightful, and they had everyone on the tour. A lot of the places that were owned like private land. Because of the conservation laws, that anything that was changed in like the environment had to be put back once they were done.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of the places didn't look like they had looked, but at least two of the places, the people had tried to like be like, no, we'll clean this up, and then they just sort of kept it. And one of the things that the family had was it was one of the strangers' cloaks that they had left behind, and they said, oh no, we'll totally throw in the garbage. And then they had it in like the cabin that you went into like before, and they were like, here, we kept this memorabilia. So it was really great, and I was glad to have been able to see at least a little piece of it. It was the location was actually where the fight was between Gandalf and the stranger and the Mystics and the Harfoots at the end. So that was the location that I got to see, which was really beautiful. And yeah, but no, I really love the show. I thought it was great. I'm excited for season 2. I did read an interview that said they're going to make it darker and grittier, and I hope that that's not the case. That's not what I would like the direction to go in. However, I'll be giving it a chance regardless of what the interviews.
I do hope that that's one of those things where, for the sake of marketing, they've been directed to say stuff like that, but that it's still going to be the same show. And
same.
Sometimes they just like to put those quotes out there for appealing to the complainers, which I don't think they should do. But but hopefully, I don't know. Season 1 was great, and hopefully season 2 will be. We'll see. I will just close off because I don't think I showed a picture of him the whole time, even when we were talking about his character, going and putting Gandalf's picture up there, because that's who he is. And I just want to finish off on one of my favorite moments of this series, which is a callback to the film version of the Fellowship of the Ring, which is when Nori says, she doesn't know which way to go, and he says there's, a faint smell in the air, and he says, when in doubt, Lori Brandyfoot, always follow your nose.
Yeah.
And my heart just melted at that, and I was so overjoyed, because that shows that this show is not only honoring Tolkien's legacy, but also the legacy of the story told by other people in other hands, because that comes specifically from Peter Jackson's film. And what is so joyous about that is I have always felt like in that moment when Gandalf says that to Merry in the Mines of Moria, it always felt like a callback to something to me. And so to have it in this moment, it just feels like a circle, as another franchise says, the circle is now complete. And it was so perfect for me. So yeah. Thank you all for tuning in, and thank you, Aaron, for joining us, and thank you, Cecilia, for being with us as long as you were able, which, to be fair, was a full 3 hours. You guys, I'm so sorry. It's just I'm not going to be able to change. I really am not. But this conversation was a long time coming, indeed, and I'm glad that we all finally got to do it. And thank you, everybody who joined us in the chat. You guys were great, and come back next week if you're so inclined. We'll be talking the season 3 premiere of Star Wars: The Bad Batch. So thank you very much, and I hope you all have a wonderful night. Namare.
Namari.